Welcome to this week's show. Once again, it kind of feels like forever since we've done a podcast, but it's just because you've been away. And
we recorded a whole bunch and got them ready before I left.
That's actually why, because we pre-recorded the intro to the last show.
Did you remember and record the outros?
I did.
Good, because I haven't listened to the podcast. Yeah. So I've been in New Zealand, and that is what this show is going to be all about. Kind of a little bit. In fact, very little about my experience there, but mainly an interview with...
You do talk about it.
A little bit, yeah. But it's mainly an interview with Joseph Peters from Hard Yards Hunting, who I spent most of my time with when I was up in the mountains of New Zealand. So you're going to find out all about him and his thinking and his ethos and his ethics, and get a bit of a feel for the lay of the land in New Zealand, which was a very, very interesting experience.
Huge array of topics are covered today. Like Byron said, mainly to do with New Zealand, so a lot of hunting ethics, as well as explaining what heli hunting is, public lands, land use, what's going on in New Zealand in terms of wildlife management or lack of management.
It'll be quite interesting for especially our North American listeners in the conversations about public lands, because you guys have your public lands, and it's very topical right now in North America. And New Zealand also have public lands, but it's a very different landscape.
Yeah, it would have been a good one to have Tyler on.
It would have been, actually, yeah, to get him to ask the questions. Or well, maybe we'll have to try and hook that up. We'll need to get Joesph over to Scotland so he can see what it's like here.
Exactly. Now, this is it's a bloody good podcast. I think I looked at the runtime, and I think it's about 2 hours, 20 minutes. So, I hope
it's 2 hours, 20 minutes?
I think it's about that, yeah. Hopefully, especially with the intro and outro, it will be about that. So I hope you've got a long car journey, which I'm sure many of you do, driving to the game fair.
Yes.
Because I imagine most people live within... I say most people who go to the show probably live within an hour-ish radius. I would say the majority of people, and then there'll be other people coming from much further away.
And we're talking about specifically the game fair that's this weekend, which is the one at...
the Schoon Palace Game Fair with the GWCT.
Yes, and we've been giving away tickets for that for the last 3 shows.
Giving away 6 tickets. As well as other things that we've been giving away as well. So,
what I was going to say before we got on to and moved away from what we were talking about today is that this show was actually recorded in 2 halves, as you will hear, and the reason being that we recorded this in a mountain hut up one of the valleys right towards the end of my sort of trip, and we were both basically falling asleep at one point while I was asking questions while Joesph was answering. So I thought, right, let's call it a day here. That was about an hour in, and then we picked it up again the morning after. But you will hear that as you listen through. It was a really cool environment to record a podcast in. The weather was a bit crap, to be fair, compared to the previous week, which had been absolutely awesome for us. I couldn't have asked for better weather for filming and photography. But we were up the top of this valley and basically couldn't really see anything because the cloud was so low. But we made the most of it and recorded a podcast in the heart of it, as it was. So if you hear any sort of creaking and knocks and stuff, it's because we're in this really old cabin and it was windy outside.
You'll start to see pictures from New Zealand coming up. I've put 2 up on Instagram so far. That's mainly because I think there's about 1,000, so I've only managed to edit. I think I'm on 20 of 1,000 right now, but with picture editing, especially if you do any editing yourself, as soon as I start sorting out the profiles and kind of the lighting in, you might get a set of pictures that are 50 pictures from the same scene but they're different things. It means that I can actually put the color profiles and that I want across 50, and then the process starts speeding up the more I edit from that project. So give me another 100 pictures and it should start speeding up.
And there will be a film to come out as well, but we will keep you updated about that. So keep your eye on our social media.
We're going to be uploading, I think, nearly all of our films to Instagram TV, because they are now, if you don't know what Instagram TV is...
Then where have you been?
Where have you been?
It's happened while I've been in New Zealand.
Byron didn't even know about it. Basically, they are now allowing you to upload videos up to 1 hour long. They say it has to be vertical, but that's ridiculous because nobody films vertically, really. So it was because they wanted to encourage filmmakers to film vertically, but I mean, unless you're shooting everything.
So that means everything but that means that they would want you to shoot everything on its side.
The thing is you don't view life vertically. So I don't really understand it at all.
But all you got to do is turn your phone around.
Your phone around. So when we put up a picture, just do the really hard task of putting your phone on the side, and then
when we put up the film,
then turn your phone on the side, and then you can view it perfectly. But yeah, I think it will actually be a good thing because, especially if you're wanting to get away from Facebook, which we eventually one day hopefully can get away from Facebook. Instagram
is the goal.
Instagram will cover everything that we want to do, which is put up pictures and put up film. Without the rest of the clutter.
Without all the garbage, yeah.
So it's actually going there, and they're owned by the same company. So I'm just hoping that they don't screw up Instagram.
Hopefully, I can't imagine anybody's going to sit for an hour and watch something on Instagram.
No,
most of our films are a lot shorter than that. They're between sort of 5 and 12 minutes.
I can't imagine it, but we're still going to put them up anyway,
yeah.
Just in case you do, because you might have a
spare hour. Well, you surf on Instagram.
Yeah.
So that is that, and I'll give you more snippets about New Zealand in podcasts coming up. I won't talk too much about it now, just because this podcast is so long as it is anyway. We have a few things to mention, though, before we really get into it, and the first of which is that it is now possible to pre-order Modern Huntsman Volume 2.
Yes,
on the website. Well,
it is on the website. I think the date we were given was roughly, I think it was September. Please don't quote me on that. It is on the website.
It's this year.
But these dates are rough. So those are the dates that we were given from the United States. And I believe everything is still on schedule. So it's just about printing it and getting it over. And as people know that listen to the show, it takes a wee while to get stuff over here. Incidentally, the people that have recently pre-ordered Modern Huntsman, it has all arrived in the country as of today.
Yeah. So I don't think it'll go out on Monday.
It's actually quite bad timing because we are going to the game fair, so shipping, like Byron said, is probably going to be delayed until the Monday. But rest assured, your copy is in the country and you should have it within a week.
Yeah, which is good news. And in Volume 2, as we mentioned before, we are going to be in it. And one of the stories from us is going to be from my trip to New Zealand. So you will be able to see some of the pictures and all the printed glory that is Modern Huntsman when Volume 2 comes out.
We have a number of copies that will be available for sale at the Game Fair, which is this weekend. So if you want to get your hands on it, make sure you get to the stall ASAP.
I think we've got 50 copies.
50 copies. And if that's anything, judging by the Northern Shooting Show, they won't be around.
I don't think they'll be there by Sunday.
By Sunday.
If you're going this weekend, come to the tent. We are A14.
And if you can't make it to the Game Fair, then put in an order now.
Yeah,
during this weekend, and your copy will be put aside from the copies that are available for sale, because if you don't do that, the likelihood is after this weekend, unless you've pre-ordered, you'll be waiting for the next shipment, which could be in another few weeks.
We have another prize with this podcast. All the ticket giveaways for the Game Fair this weekend are done and dusted. Everybody has received their tickets. The competition that we are running for this podcast is to win a reloading die. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you probably don't reload your own ammunition. If it's not something you've done before, you should try it out, because the best that I can give you for a comparison in terms of satisfaction is if you fish and you tie your own flies. It's kind of the same thing. If you like to hunt and you shoot full-bore rifles, so you can and you reload, to some extent, it gives you the same kind of satisfaction. So we are giving away a Hornady full-length reloading die. I want to say to you that it'll be of a caliber of your choice, and that will be true if they have the caliber. So if it's a pretty standard caliber like 308 or 243 or 223, I'm sure they'll have it. I don't have it here at the office, and I will put in a request for it. So if you were looking for a new full-length reloading die, now is your opportunity. And to enter, we're going to make it a social media affair. as usual, I'll stick up a picture of my reloading bench or some of my reloading kit that I've got. And I think we'll just make it a very simple case of tagging a friend below. But if you do not do the Instagram and you do not do the Facebook, then just email the show, because it'll be completely randomly selected in any case.
For the people that have bought the podcast stickers over the last however many months, we will be having our eyes looking for them at the show. And if we spot any podcast stickers around, then
we've got Smith Optics shooting glasses, and if whoever will put it up on there, we'll announce it on the podcast, and we'll get the registration, the make and model, and then I don't know, we'll do it so we're not reading out the registration on well, not the full registration.
The full registration. So if it's like a Toyota Hilux blue, and it
starts with an H.
Yeah, starts with S. Then you need to give us the rest of the registration, and then
that's a good idea.
Yeah.
So make sure you've got your sticker. If you've bought one and you haven't put it in the car yet, and you're going to the show this weekend, make sure you get it up.
Yeah, and if you don't have one, buy one at the show.
Yeah, you'll find we'll have them available.
We have lots of eyes walking around the show, so there's still a chance if you buy one, you can still be spotted. Yeah.
Now we're going to have to walk around that car park that's got like 20,000 cars in it and look for...
Yeah, hopefully it won't be too hard to see them.
Hopefully not.
The biggest problem with the car stickers is me and Byron both have tinted cars, and you can't actually see the car sticker on a car.
The only vehicle I've got that you can see it in is a Defender.
The Defender. It's really, really annoying. I really like having the tinted windows on a vehicle because for security, and also it's a bit cooler in the back. But it's a real pain for car stickers.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way that we can get around that unless you had a sticker that
on
you
the
put
outside,
on the outside.
Yeah.
But most stickers are designed to go on the inside.
And also, I don't really like putting a sticker. Or you could put it on the window, because I was going to say I don't really like putting it on the paintwork unless it's one of the proper ones.
Now, the last thing that I wanted to bring up was the fact that we will be once again trying to raise money for good causes. Some of you will remember that we raise money for the chimpanzee sanctuary, the Lawairu chimpanzee sanctuary. I'm trying to think, was it this year or last year?
It was last year.
Last year, which was fantastically successful, and we had a lot of donations from you great people. And we don't know what we want to raise money for yet. So the first question to all the listeners is, tell us of a great cause.
Yeah.
We'll probably put something up on social asking the same question, but feel free to contact us in all the million ways that there are to contact us via the social platforms and give us your thoughts, or send us an email, and we'll probably put it up to a public vote. It's
entirely up to you, and if what we'll do is we'll look at them and kind of top three we'll put up to a vote, and you guys decide, and we'll raise money for it. It can even be one we've already done. If you think that you want to do the chimpanzees again, do it again. But please give us a suggestion, because it's you're going to be helping us.
Yes, and then in the coming weeks, once we've decided, we've actually already got a whole bunch of stuff that was given to us that we're going to raffle off. So that'll be part of the way that we're going to raise money. We've got some knives. We have some signed Donnie Vincent DVDs that he very kindly sent us, and a whole heap of other stuff.
It can be anything from any part of the world, but we'll look into it and make sure it's a worthy
cause.
A worthy cause.
And that was it. That was the last thing I wanted to say.
Was that
you done, Dusted?
I think so. The weather has been glorious in the UK. Actually, it's been too good because I still haven't got my bees because the weather's been too hot to ship them, which has been really annoying. They're down. They're in England, waiting. Next week it's meant to be a bit cooler. My hives are in position, and I'm waiting for my bees. So
I'm sure you will give everybody an update of your bees arriving.
Yeah, I will. Trust me.
Once they get here.
Once they're here, you're going to be...
We're not going to be able to hear anything else apart from bees.
Inundated with pictures of bees.
And that is it. Enjoy this show from the mountains of New Zealand. Okay, I've got my headlamp on underneath my headset.
Just hanging over the top of the bunk.
Yeah, I don't need it on. It's kind of mood lighting and the steam from your tea. Joesph, welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. I don't think we could be more into the wilderness really than where we are. We are at the end of. I've kind of lost track of the days now. I've been with you for 7-8 days, something like that.
Maybe 9.
Yeah, maybe 9. And we are currently sitting in one of the many mountain huts that you have in New Zealand. I'm on the other side of the world from where I normally record this podcast, in Scotland. I'm in New Zealand with Joesph, which, if you're a regular podcast listener, you will know that I was heading over here. We've had an incredible week. We've actually had fantastic weather as well. And we are in the Mount Cook Reserve National Park.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm trying to work out where to start. We've covered a lot of ground. Literally, with our legs, we've covered a lot of ground, and we've covered a lot of ground while we've been talking up in the mountains over the last few days. It's been fascinating having a chance to learn about New Zealand and be up in the mountains hunting the animals that you've got. I suppose a good place to start would just be the trip that we've just been on, the wilderness hunt. Where did you take me, and why did you take me there? I mean, it was awesome, and we'll kind of go through the days a little bit to give people an insight into what we were doing.
Yeah, so we headed into the edge of the Landsborough Valley. There's a number of different areas you can hunt in New Zealand, and our main focus for this was Tahr and chamois. So we wanted to be in the South Island, in the Southern Alps, within the Tahr range, and we were pretty blessed to have a good weather forecast, about as good as it could get. So if the weather's good, it's best to head west, I think. The West Coast offers a pretty unique experience where you can hunt Tahr and chamois, or chamois, as they're also called, within the same area, pretty close proximity, as we found out. And it's pretty cool to be able to see both species together, and it's a pretty unique environment where we can go from being within the bush line to a proper alpine environment in a really short space. It's a really compressed ecosystem, and pretty good mixture of species. We also got to see a lot of bird life, which was good.
Yeah, some pretty rare bird life, actually.
Yep. Yeah, we got to see some cool critters, some South Island kaka and some bush wrens and a few other critters that not many people get to see, which is a great experience to add into it as well. So I kind of chose that area because we had a good weather forecast and we could have a chance at getting both animals, which we did, and we had a pretty good run, I think.
Yeah, we did. So how do your wilderness hunts normally work? If you're a client coming here, what can they expect? I mean, I've obviously been lucky enough to sample that now, but for someone who's thinking of coming to New Zealand and particularly want that experience, and there'll be a lot of our listeners will be looking at the pictures that we're going to be putting up in the coming weeks and seeing that. What can they expect, and what form does it normally take?
So our wilderness hunts are usually a week to sort of 10 or 12 days in length, and we're focused on either tahr, chamois, or both species, depending on how much time we have and what the weather's doing. And these are pretty similar hunts, I think, compared to sheep and mountain goat hunts, in North America, and ibex or sheep hunts in Asia. So it's a true wilderness hunt, and we generally use a mixture of helicopter access and proper backpack style access, depending on people's fitness and the weather and the conditions available to us. So like the trip we did, we take a short helicopter flight into our sort of base camp area where we set up our camp, which is normally just tents. Sometimes we will stay in a hut or a cabin, but we normally stay in tent camps because we can get better hunting access, I think, out of tents. And then we're just hunting on foot from there. It's just spot and stalk. You're covering the miles, and we might move our campground with us, depending on people's fitness and their abilities and the type of terrain we're in, or we might just hunt from that one base camp, depending on what the conditions are doing and what kind of animals we're seeing.
It is a very physical way to hunt. I'd done a bit of preparation prior to coming here, not as much as I would have liked, but it is right up there as the most physical hunts that I've done in my life. What would you say to people who are coming with that in mind, in terms of how they need to just get their sort of mindset and preparation ready so that they can get the most enjoyment out of it? Because there's nothing worse than when you're hanging out and you're trying to enjoy a hunt. It is always going to be hard, I think, no matter what you've prepared for, but there are some things you can do just to get ready.
Yeah, the best thing you can do is just try and have a high base level fitness. Like us, we're lucky, younger guys, we can just kind of turn up and make it happen and grind it out and get through the trip. But as you get older, and a lot of stresses in life and everything like that add up, and generally your base level fitness is going to drop off. So the easiest thing, it's hard to get fit.
Yeah, it is.
But it's a lot easier to stay fit. So I think, gym work and things like that are good, but I think just basic walking is the best thing you can do, because that's what you're going to be doing on the hill. And just with a light pack,
You're not going to be doing bicep curls on the hill.
No, we don't see many curl racks on the hill, and we don't see many stair machines, and we don't see many treadmills. I think the best training you can do is just walking off trail, get out in the bush and just walk around with a light pack. You don't want a real heavy pack, something like 10 kilos, like 20 pounds, 25 pounds. Because the reality is most of the hunting we do is just day hunting, so you're just carrying your day gear. You're not carrying, unless you want to be a cameraman and carry around 100 different lenses. We're not carrying We're not carrying a huge amount of gear, so you don't need to be Hercules. You just need a good base level fitness. Look after your back, look after your knees, and obviously it's hard for people that live in areas of the world where they don't have access to the hills or the mountains. For those guys, your stair machines or walking up and down actual stairs are about all you can do. But anything's better than nothing. Just trying to be as fit as you can, and mental preparation's a big thing, which you just kind of have to be prepared to suffer a little bit, I think. Like on our trip, for example, like the weather was beautiful, but because we were walking through snow, we both ended up with wet boots, which both ended up fairly frozen at times. And things like that is pretty hard to train for. You just kind of have to suck it up and deal with it.
You can't let it get you down.
No. When you're on the hill and and you fall over and you're wet and cold, you've got two options. You can either sit down and cry, or you can laugh about it and just get on with the job. And having a good positive attitude and a little bit of hardship kind of adds to the experience if you've got the right attitude.
I think at the end of the day, it ends up kind of meaning more if you've. It's almost the more you suffer, the more it seems to mean. It's a weird parallel that, but it is true, I think. Yeah.
A little bit of pain never hurt anyone. It's one of those things, we're not out there to make your life miserable. That's not our job. We're trying to look after you as hunters. We're not trying to beat you into the ground. But a little bit of preparation, before the hunt can really make your life a lot easier. It's no fun for anyone if you turn up and you're completely unprepared and you're just having a bad time. So that is kind of why we offer different hunts in New Zealand. So we kind of try to tailor the package to people. If you're not going to be 110%, don't book on a wilderness hunt. We'll do a private land hunt. We've got other options. There's no point in putting yourself into that environment if you're not prepared for it mentally or physically. There's no fun for anyone.
We're going to get into a little bit about the types of hunting that there are here in New Zealand, but just to sort of carrying this through the actual hunting experience and preparation for it. It's been interesting to chat with you over the last week about the kinds of kit that work and don't work in this kind of environment. And one of the things which even you had said that when you first saw them, you're like, why the hell do you need that? But it's awesome, and I'm going to get some when I get home, is some down pants just to throw over.
Yeah.
So just running through your kind of kit list, what do people need to think about? Because ultimately, they need to bring kind of gear with them to be ready for a hunt like we've done, You need if you came completely unprepared in terms of gear, you could be in you're certainly going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. The big thing in New Zealand is it's a really changeable environment. The weather we've seen has been pretty good, but in a typical day you can wake up in sunshine and it could be raining and it could be hailing and it could be snowing and it could be sunshine again. All within,
like Scotland.
All within a day, yep. So you want to be able to change your layers and get it in and out of warm gear and your wet weather gear pretty easily and efficiently. New Zealand's not super cold. We don't have crazy cold temperatures, but it is wet. So a lot of people think, it's not going to be that cold, it's not going to be that bad, but when it's 3 degrees and you're wet, it's colder than when it's -10, because once it gets to a certain temperature, all the moisture dries up and it's a lot easier to keep warm, whereas quite often we end up wet, doesn't matter what we do. Like on our hunt, we didn't have any rain, but we ended up wet,
moving through snow.
Yeah, moving through snow or sweat and whatever, you end up wet one way or another. So having gear that dries out reasonably quickly and functions when wet is good.
I think that is key. A lot of people don't consider that enough, I don't think, is how quickly does your gear dry.
Yeah.
Because at some point it's going to get wet.
Yeah, especially your rain gear, you want to have proper lightweight hard shell, none of the soft face rain gear. I don't really have a place for that in the mountains, because once it gets wet, you have a raincoat that gets wet on day one, 7 days later it's still wet. You're not going to dry that jacket out.
Can't shake it out.
No. So having a lighter weight jacket that's a proper hard shell is going to dry out pretty quickly. And the same with your pants. Rain pants are a pretty important thing, I think, because we're often walking through vegetation that's kind of knee to waist high. So gaiters don't really help you much, and having good durable rain pants that you can take on and off. You need full zippers, so you can take them on and off. That makes a huge difference to your comfort, because wet boots and wet feet are pretty miserable, as we found out, and especially with sub-zero temperatures in the mornings and the evenings.
It's quite important to just labour the point about the full zips, though, because I've had a lot of pairs of rain pants over the years, and the ones that you've got are the first ones that I've seen that, although, I mean, there are others that exist, but they're the first ones that I've had a look at properly myself, where you can leave your boots and everything on and not struggle to get them around the heel of your boot, which I have done many times with rain pants that I've got, where they have a long zip, but they only come up to your knee. And so you still got to drag your foot through it, whereas those ones you can put on standing up.
Yeah.
Which is really great.
Yeah, they're completely impractical almost if they don't have full zips. And the ventilation as well, you can unzip them from the top down.
Yeah.
And vent them out when you're walking, because, we use rain pants. I use rain pants nearly every day, even just for wind. And just as a little extra layer. They don't really have any insulation in them, but they still stop the wind and keep you that much warmer when you stop. You might stop for half an hour, stop for an hour to glass, and you can just whip them out, put them on, take them off, put them back in your bag when you start moving again. It's a pretty simple thing to have in your bag, but it makes a big difference to your comfort in the hills.
Mm. And what about sort of your mid layers? Because I've been wearing like a synthetic puffy jacket that I, of no particular brand, but I had that in Nepal, and I've had it now here as well, and I found that quite good, because it packs down fairly tight, and I can stack it away in my rucksack, and then put it on quite easily if it's getting a bit cold. Yeah,
it's not super cold here, and our hunting's usually pretty active, so you don't need massive insulation layers. You can normally get away with a good base layer, maybe one mid layer, and then most lightweight insulation layers on the market work well here. You don't need the real heavy, super warm layers.
Not the Michelin Man puffy ones.
No, you don't really need that. I'm wearing one right now.
It is cold in the hut, though.
Because it's cold and I'm skinny. But generally you don't need these massive insulation layers like you see people wearing, North America and Europe. You guys get temperatures that are a lot colder than here. So you can get away with fairly light layers, but you want to be able to take them on and off and layer accordingly, because you soon warm up when you start moving. In terms of synthetic versus down, I don't know, I'm still kind of on the fence. And the same with base layers. I grew up on a merino farm and have, from a small child had it beaten into me that you've got to wear wool. And I pretty much have always worn wool next to skin up until last year. I got one of Polartec's Polar Grid fleeces as a base layer, which I've been using. I think I'm wearing it right now. I wore that for a whole trip. I think I've got it on now. Yeah, I've got it on now. And I've worn that, a whole week or 10-day trips without ever taking it off. And I do think some of the newer synthetics are probably better than merino in terms of wicking moisture and drying faster. The odour thing's probably up for debate. I don't think there's much in it. Durability wise, it's hard to say. Depends how you're using it. In terms of insulation, sleeping bags, I think down is king.
You're the one you've got right now is down.
Yeah,
we're both sitting in our sleeping bags because it's so freaking cold.
Yeah,
mine's down as well. I've got a rab down.
I think down's king. You can generally keep your sleeping bag dry or dry-ish. I have spent a bit of time with a wet down bag, but it's hard to say. The synthetics I haven't had a lot to do with, but I've been doing a bit of research into them at the moment, and from what I've found, the very best synthetics on the market are still only about half the insulation value of like 800 or 850 loft down. So your high level down, you can get away with half the weight in terms of insulation for the synthetics. When they get wet, it's obviously a different thing, but you've got to really think about how often are you actually getting wet. Can you keep your insulation dry? So things like with your sleeping bag, you can look at lightweight bivy sacks. Like my guide Tim, he more or less always sleeps in his sleeping bag in a bivy sack, inside a tent or whatever.
Does he just do that just to make sure it doesn't get wet?
Yeah. So things like in your tent when you're moving around, condensation dripping on your sleeping bag, and especially, most of us, the end of your sleeping bag, your head and your toes always end up rubbing against the tent and always end up wet. So you can get away with, if you look at your sleeping bag plus a bivy bag, is still going to be lighter than a down bag, than a synthetic bag.
Sure. Of
the same temperature rating. I think anyway. That's where I'm sitting at the moment. I might change my mind. The synthetics, there's a few new synthetics coming out at the moment. But yeah, I think I just need to spend a bit more time playing with them.
We were talking about, it's particularly pertinent when you end up successfully killing something, then you've got to go and pack the meat out. About just the weight of packs and how to minimize that whole system. What's your sort of mindset on it? Because we were carrying just pretty average packs when we were walking around, not super light, but not extremely heavy either. But when you got to start packing stuff out, it does start to mount up a bit.
Yeah, your best way to cut weight's probably not take 2 or 3 cameras and hide the lenses.
Another dig.
Yeah, you can save a lot of weight there. There's a lot of lightweight and ultralight gear on the market, but at the end of the day, if you want a lighter pack, you've just got to take less stuff. And it's hard. As a guide, we have to have the spare this and a spare that when something breaks, and we've got to have the big first aid kit and all the extra things that you've forgotten I've got to have. So we kind of end up by default as a pack pony. That's something we kind of have to deal with, but it depends a lot on what kind of conditions you're in, and it takes a while to work out what you can get away with. In terms of, do I really need this? Is this going to keep me warm and dry? Is this food? Is this an essential item? And it's like, well, no. Well, then get rid of it. If you don't actually need it. There's a lot of small things out there, like bipods, for example, are one thing that I think you can get away with. You can shoot off your pack. You can shoot off your tripod if you've got a spotting scope. I'm probably not the best person to talk to at the moment about lightweight packs. I'm packing around a 95mm spotting scope all the time. A few years ago, I was really going down the lightweight aisle, and and cutting weight on everything.
Well, you're cutting your toothbrush in half. Like
Yeah,
Did you do that?
I've got it cut in half at the moment.
Oh, do you?
Generally, the problem with going lightweight with gear is you sacrifice a lot for durability. And it depends on how much you're using it. As guides, we're kind of on the highest end of use and abuse. So
I've seen that, the way you use a rifle as a walking stick.
Yeah, so gear wears out pretty quickly for us. So a lot of that lightweight stuff isn't cost effective for us to use. You're just better off to have less things in your bag.
It takes a while, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To get a system.
Yeah, and everyone's different. Everyone has different comfort levels on things that they think are worth having or not. Most guys I see are packing, things like pillows. A blow up pillow. Like, do you need one of those?
No. Stuff some extra clothes in the mommy hood of your sleeping bag.
Yeah, I've never used a pillow. You're going to have a down jacket or whatever that you can use as a pillow, or a dry bag or something you can fill with extra pair of socks.
Dry bag's a good one, actually. I've done that quite a bit. I've got quite a few light dry bags, and I just ram some extra clothes in there and fold it over, and there you go, pillow, job done. Yeah,
things like that where you can cut corners and try to think about the things you're carrying in your pack. Does it have 2 uses or 3 uses? You want to be able to have everything in your bag that you can use for 2 or 3 different things, because if it's only got one use, unless you're using it all the time for that particular thing, it's hardly worth carrying around.
And what about on the sort of, not specifically the rifle, but in terms of how you need to come prepared in terms of caliber choice? I would imagine, as with a lot of parts of the world, quite a lot of people probably come a bit overgunned.
Yeah.
For what they're hunting.
Yep. Yeah, I'm a small caliber guy. I don't like recoil much, and I think you can get away with little guns if you can shoot. And the most important thing at the end of the day is shot placement and bullet construction. Things like your energy and the velocity and all those things, they come secondary to where you can hit an animal.
You don't need a 338 Win Mag to come hunting.
No, I think there's a big misconception, I think anyway, with mountain hunting. The little bit I've seen internationally and in New Zealand here is people kind of put mountain hunting and long range shooting in the same boat, whereas it's not necessarily the case. Like the Tahr we shot was 150 yards. Was the chamois was 160, something like that.
Yeah, it wasn't all that far.
And most of the game that we're shooting with my clients, and most of the game I've shot myself, is well under 300 yards, and most of it's under 200 yards. And part of that is because we do spend some more time getting closer, but that usually pays off, especially in terms of terrain analysis. As we found out, things aren't quite as they seem. You can look at a spot and go, oh, there's a Tahr or whatever, we'll be able to get over there, and you can shoot them at 500 yards. And then you walk over there and go,
I need to be a mountain goat to get up there.
It's too steep, or I lost them in the cliffs, or and that happens a lot, especially in New Zealand with Tahr. There's a lot of animals that shot and lost, and
just because people can't get to them.
Yeah, I think some of it's poor choices and some of it's inexperience, and it's easy to do. It's easy to shoot, especially with modern equipment. It's easy to shoot out 400 or 500 yards, or even further if you've got a good setup, but. Is that really what you want to be doing? At the end of the day, when you shoot that animal, you've still got to walk over there and get him.
Yeah.
So what do you gain?
Yeah.
There's definitely situations where you can't get closer, but usually you can get within 350 yards, 300 yards, which at those kind of ranges, pretty much all the normal calibers you see out there floating around, like a 7mm08 or 308, a 243 that we've been using, they will get the job done. You don't need, this 6.5, 55, things like that are mild calibers, easy to shoot. You can get away with a lighter gun because you can actually shoot it.
Yeah.
And you can shoot uphill, downhill, steep angles, offhand, off your knees. Those are the things that are important, I think.
One of the things that we were discussing was the need to be comfortable in shooting in different positions fairly swiftly.
Yep.
Yeah, it's one thing lying and shooting off a bipod day in, day out, and shooting very well out to whatever range, but the reality is, as I've seen here, especially when you're in some of those steep gullies, is a nice shot like that's probably not going to present itself.
Yeah, exactly. And that there's tied in with, I think, bigger calibers. I've seen a lot of hunters from all over the world, and there is guys out there that can pick up a 338 and shoot it with a smile on their face, but the rest of us can't. You know, there's a small percentage of shooters that can shoot big guns easily. You know, increased noise, increased recoil, all these things add up. And when you're trying to shoot a 45-degree angle uphill off your knees, it all adds up into a miss.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like where you shot your Tahr, for example, we're in a steep sort of position. We were shooting in a small gap through the trees into a slip. It was only 150 yards, but you had pretty limited options on how you could shoot.
Yeah.
And someone that's reasonably experienced, like it was good for me to watch you. You just sat down and shoot across your knees. You didn't even think about it. You weren't messing around there going, oh, how am I going to do this? Because you knew how to shoot field positions. And I think shooting off your knees, like sitting on your ass, shooting off your knees, is the most versatile and useful position for hunting. Nearly all the game animals I've shot are shooting like that, and you can shoot really well like that. You should practice shooting groups. You should be able to shoot out to 300 yards or across your knees like that.
Something that I often write about, actually, in some of the articles in the magazines, is practice on the range as you would hunt in the field. Because beyond checking to make sure that your reload is shooting correct and your rifle is zeroed, lying down prone at 100 meters, all comfortable on a sandbag, is of basically no use to you for practicing a hunting situation.
Yeah, things like, I've seen guys, like those lead sleds, you know, like those kind of setups. Like
lead sleds?
You know those, you seen a lead sled? It's like this.
No.
It's like this.
Is it an armrest thing?
Yeah, it's like this ridiculous thing that you sit your gun in and then you shoot off it.
And that thing, yeah.
Lead sled, because you fill it up with lead because your gun kicks so much you can't shoot it. So you shoot it out of this thing. And it's like, well, if you can't happily shoot your gun, why do you have it?
Yeah.
You know, if you can't go out there and put 100 rounds through your gun just for fun, then you shouldn't be shooting it. You know, you should be able to, like my gun, I can shoot left-handed. You should be able to shoot left-handed. Why not?
Yeah.
You know, there's positions where you be in that position on the hill where that might be the only shot you've got.
Yeah.
And you should be able to take that shot if you practice. I think once you've got your gun sighted in, and I've written about this a little bit, but I think small game shooting, like rabbit shooting, is probably the best thing you can do with your big gun. And, you know, it seems simple. You think, oh, I can shoot half-inch groups at 100 yards. Well, get out there, you should be able to shoot a rabbit at 200 yards all day long. But
not always that easy.
When you actually try and do it, it's not that easy. You'd think it would be easy. And at the end of the day, you know, if you're shooting a rabbit or you're shooting a deer or a tahr or whatever, you should still be trying to hit the same size target.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how big that animal is. You're still trying to hit a little dot on them, pick a spot. So I think once you've got your gun sorted, got it sighted in, get out there and try and shoot as many small game or as many targets as you can in sort of awkward positions.
And force yourself.
Yeah. I like, one of the things I've done a little bit, which is good fun, is get like old milk bottles or something, fill them up with water, and just chuck them around at, you know, start at maybe 20 yards and work your way out to a couple of 100 yards. Don't range how far they are, just chuck them around and just shoot them as fast as you can.
Yeah.
From standing or sitting or whatever. Don't have a bipod, don't have a sandbag, because, you know, you want to be prepared to shoot in the real world, where you don't have all that stuff helping you.
I've done the same thing with small bags of flour.
Yeah.
Because then you end up with a great strike when you're successful. And you'd think, actually, if you hit a bag of flour with a full-bore rifle, that it would blow the whole bag apart, but it doesn't. you can normally get about 4 shots out of a normal bag of flour before it's completely disintegrated. But yeah, doing that kind of stuff, the problem is, I think, for a lot of people, is that they don't necessarily have the flexibility to go to a range where they can go and do that. And I'm lucky in that I do have access to ground that I can go and shoot out to 400, 500 meters even, just for practice. Because if you can hone your skills in awkward positions out to ranges like that, then it makes taking closer, much more relatable shots in the field almost second nature.
Yeah. I think the range things. There's a lot of people restricted. The same with the fitness, you're restricted by what you can do. We're lucky here. I don't think I've ever actually been to a rifle range.
No.
Ever. You just get a cardboard box and sight in on that and then away you go. So we're pretty lucky here, especially with smaller, what I call like medium game, like goats, are a good example, and wallabies, where you can get out and shoot quite a lot of animals in a short space of time. In the field, in uphill, downhill, awkward angles. When you're sidling around a face, you can't lie down when you're sidling, on a steep face. So you've got to shoot sitting. That there's good practice if you've got it available.
Getting to the hunting in New Zealand and what is available, I think a good place to start to try and explain that to our listeners is somewhat how you started to explain it to me, which was a bit of a background check on the species that are here and how they got here and how that's sort of changed over time.
Yeah, so New Zealand.
That could take about 3 hours doing that, but
you can write a book on it.
The kind of shortened version of it.
There's been a few written. So New Zealand's a pretty new landmass in terms of being inhabited by people. So the white man turned up here pretty late on the piece, and when we turned up, there's pretty much only birds here. All our native mammals are either seals, whales, dolphins, and we do have a couple of species of bats, but we had no large land mammals at all in New Zealand. So New Zealand was colonised by mainly Englishmen and Scotsmen.
Hence some of the names.
Yep. And when we turned up, we thought, it'd be quite good to have a few deer around to hunt. It'd be good to have a pig to eat. So the first animals that were brought over here with the sailors were pigs and goats, which were let go. Through most of the Pacific Islands, you have pigs and goats, which were let go as a kind of safety net for when you get shipwrecked. And they spread pretty quickly. And then through the mid-1800s, we had a number of what were called acclimatisation societies set up, and these were designed to acclimatise new species, both plants and animals, into New Zealand, and make a lot of New Zealand look like England. So we've got a number of English trees, around the towns, and they started off with red deer. They were our first game animal brought into the country, and there was a number of liberations all throughout the country, from Scottish stock and a number of English game parks. And they did pretty well, and then we kind of kept adding to the piece. So through the late 1800s into the early 1900s, we ended up with 7 species of deer here, and tahr and chamois and feral goats, feral sheep and feral pigs. And we've got wallabies, and we've got rabbits and hares as well to add to the mix.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'll let you carry on your story of the history, but for people back in the UK, one of the things I've been absolutely fascinated with is that they've only got brown hare here, but the brown hare live in ranges that we would normally see mountain hare at home. It's quite incredible to see how high they've been. But anyway, sorry, carry on, Joseph.
You do see a lot of hares when you're up tahr hunting. They get right up and amongst it, even in the middle of winter, like we're seeing. They're not afraid of the snow. So some of these species didn't do too well, like the moose have kind of fizzled out, and a few other things like axis or the chital deer, they didn't do too well. But in general, most of the species did pretty well. They took to our habitat pretty well. It's a mild climate. We don't have really harsh winters, and when these animals were first let go, they've got no predators, a pretty much unlimited food source. So the trophies that were produced during the early 1900s were pretty impressive. And the first period of hunting was a pretty managed system. So a lot of these species, when they first let them go, all the hunting was closed. They just let them do their thing until the numbers started to breed up. And then we had seasons and tag restrictions, and these were bought generally by wealthy hunters, both from within New Zealand and international. We had people travelling to New Zealand to hunt right in the early 1900s, mainly for our red stags, because we had, at the time, some of the best red stags in the world, especially from our Scottish bloodlines. We had still hill country style stags, but on steroids. So, they're still the really nice style, these nice big 12s and nice big 14s, but just massive dimensions compared to what they
It's amazing
produce
how
in their homeland.
How the different habitat, because they were the same deer. They came from what we see, and I see very close to my house all the time, but they just went on to produce colossal heads.
Yeah.
Just changing habitat and food source.
Mainly nutrition for the Scottish heads. And that was all good and well, and everyone thought this is great. Until sort of the 1930s, around that period, we started to have a few problems. The deer numbers, mainly with red deer, they were the first to kind of really get out of hand, mainly because they did more liberations of them, and they started releasing red deer before any of the other species, so they kind of bred up the fastest. And our government decided that, maybe there's too many of these deer and we don't like them so much after all, so they lifted protection off them and started to put a bit of pressure on them.
Was that the start of the sort of the professional deer colours, or did that come later?
That was sort of the very, very beginning of it. The Second World War kind of interrupted things a little bit, and pretty much every man that could hunt was trying to shoot Germans. So you can imagine our game numbers increased again during that period. And then in the 1950s, this is when the government really sort of set things up with what is referred to as deer colours, proper professional shooters.
And they actually went through an academy, didn't they?
Yeah, they had training systems for them, and then these guys were out there. They were full blown, like a small army of professional hunters. They weren't just randoms running around in the bush shooting deer. They were a bit better than that. These were pretty highly skilled guys. They might have had some basic gear, but they were pretty skilled with it. They knew how to shoot their 3.0s. And these guys were doing some pretty big effort just killing deer. They were just out there shooting thousands. Some guys had tallies of 10,000 deer or more. All on foot, just out there doing the hard yards, shooting them. And it was working, but as you've seen, like, our terrain is pretty hard to move around in, and we do have big areas of wilderness. So foot hunting has its limitations. And we started to see through the 60s and the 70s, some of these guys were thinking, man, I'm shooting 10,000 deer and I'm just letting them rot on the hill. There's got to be a better way to do this. There's got to be some more value in it. So they started to look into the meat market. And we started to see some of these guys doing commercial venison recovery and velvet as well. And that was still mainly on foot. Go out, shoot your deer, chuck it on your back, walk to town, put it in the chiller, get your money, and away you go again. But, again, just to the terrain, it's a pretty limiting factor on what you can do. You just can't physically go out and shoot 20 deer in a day and carry them all out. It's not possible. So in the 1970s, when helicopters became sort of available, we started to see a change in the hunting style, and these guys started the birth of the venison sort of wars, they called it, the helicopter wars. Through the 70s and the early 80s, we saw a massive increase in helicopter operators based around venison recovery. So these guys were out there just shooting deer for the meat market from the helicopter, flying around, pap all your deer, whip the guts out of them, chuck them in the chiller, make your fortune. There was some guys made a lot of money doing it. There was quite a few guys died doing it. It's quite
dangerous work operating helicopters in those kind of environments.
Yeah, Yeah, and especially then, health and safety and OSH and high-vis vests and things like that weren't invented. So guys were just winging it and learning on the job. And some of them learnt the hard way, which is pretty sad. You know, there was guys putting in massive hours and huge effort, and you know, guys make mistakes, and when you make mistakes in helicopters, it's not real good. And that period kind of more or less ended the government's operations on deer control, because they soon realised that helicopters were, you know, the answer to controlling deer. You know, obviously you're not going to kill them all that living in the bush, but a lot of areas where we've got beech forest, which is our predominant forest here, there's not actually a hell of a lot to eat within the beech forest itself. So a lot of those deer have to come out into the tops, into the tussock, or into the riverbeds to feed. So that is where the helicopters can pick them off, especially in the South Island, out in the tussock country. They more or less, you know, exterminated the deer in a lot of areas through commercial hunting. You know, areas like where we were driving in today, you know, these valleys historically have had quite a lot of deer in them.
We didn't see any come in.
And no, you won't see many in here now because they've pretty much killed them all. Just because of the type of terrain, you know, you can cover it all in a helicopter pretty easily, and they can't hide so well, so they can have a huge impact. And during that period through the 70s and the 80s, they also did get into the Tahr a little bit as well. We had commercial meat recovery on Tahr and chamois, and they had massive impacts on those species as well, because they're predominantly alpine animals. They live out in the open country, and they can't get away from a helicopter. Their main defence back then is to run uphill. That's their main defence from predators, and you can't outrun a helicopter running uphill. So they had massive impacts on our Tahr and our chamois and our deer. And we saw through the 1990s pretty average hunting, I would have thought. You know, this was all sort of before my time. I wasn't really around hunting then, but the populations at the moment have started to recover. At the moment, we're probably seeing the best hunting on public land than we've seen since probably the 50s or the 60s, I would say, in terms of animal numbers, access, and trophy potential. Especially our Tahr herd's very good at the moment. Our red stags, up until sort of the last couple of years, and still now, there's still some really good stags coming out of the wilderness areas and public land, but they are again under quite a bit of pressure from commercial hunters, because the venison price in the last couple of seasons has ticked back up again, and these operators are out there again. So what's now called Warrow wild animal recovery, you know, venison hunting has always existed since the 1970s and never really stopped. It's just whether it's economical to do it, whether the price of venison's high enough to run a helicopter and run a crew to get out there and shoot deer, has a huge impact on what is available on our public land in terms of trophy potential and animal numbers to hunt.
The public land's an interesting one, because you do have private land here as well.
Yep.
But your public land, you know, some of it's almost more public than others, because you do actually have like ballot systems, which I didn't know about, which you were telling me about for some blocks. Describe that public land system to me for our listeners, and especially for our American listeners, because they, especially right now, are talking about public land a lot, because they, in many instances, feel that it's sort of coming under threat, maybe for the first time in their lifetime, where they are maybe seeing areas of public land which potentially might not be public anymore. So it's very much in their mindsets. How does the public land in New Zealand work?
I'm not an expert on it, but we've got quite a lot of public land, I think, especially in the South Island, like the West Coast where we were. Nearly the whole West Coast is public land. It's all just pure wilderness, native bush. And this public land is kind of divided up into, we have national parks and wilderness areas which have little restrictions on different things you can do within them, like no fires or no dogs or no vehicle access and things like that. And then within the public land, most of it is just free access. You do what you want. more or less. Some areas will be divided up into hunting blocks, or like units, as you want to call them, and they'll be balloted, or a draw system, to get into areas that will be determined to have special interest or special trophy potential or a special species, like our wapiti, for example, our elk herd, is all within a balloted system to get access to them. And we've seen, like in my lifetime, we've seen an increase in public land. So there's a lot of big high country stations, or farms we call them, like we drove past one just today, that used to be probably nearly 10 times the size of what it is now, and they were taken on as leasehold, it was called, 100-year lease from the government for that land, and they did a review on that land usage a few years ago, and a lot of that land was determined to be not worth farming or uneconomical to farm, or you might have 100,000 acres, but 65,000 acres of it are just rocks. So the government took quite a bit of that land back and converted it back to public land, which has been good in terms of access. We've got a lot of public land, but our biggest problem here is how that public land's being managed. Our Department of Conservation manages this land on a pretty thin budget most of the time. They don't have the funding sources like we see in America, where it's a user pay system where hunters and other public land users are paying directly into the usage of that land. Whereas in New Zealand, we've got a lot of public land, but we don't have a lot of money to manage it properly.
So what does it cost you to as a Kiwi, and you want to use public land, you want to garden to the tops and enjoy some hunting? What do you give back in return for that privilege?
What do we give back?
Yeah, I mean, because in the States, there's, like we've discussed, there are ways that money feeds its way back to their game and wildlife departments. Yeah,
so apart from our just what we pay with our taxes, we don't have any direct fees. If you're using a hut, we pay, and some of our tracks, some of our great walks now do have fees on them. But just to get out there and wander around on public land, it doesn't cost you anything, which is good in some ways. But when we start having massive increases in tourists, like we're seeing at the moment, tourists are starting to outnumber New Zealand residents, and things like our national park, like Mount Cook National Park here, is putting under a lot of strain because there's very little money to manage an area that's having a couple of million tourists coming through it every year. Things like rubbish disposal and effluent and basic infrastructure, roads and tracks is very hard to manage when you're not making any money out of it.
It's crazy how many people you have coming to New Zealand. It's about the same as your entire population in a year.
Yeah, and especially like towns where I live, we've got about 1,500 people living there, and we had, I think, the last season they said about 1.5 million people coming through the town. So it's pretty hard to imagine how the infrastructure works. How do the ratepayers pay for 1.5 million people to come through that town? Obviously, a lot of us are making money out of it. There's a lot of tourist operators like myself. That's our livelihood, is tourism. But there's also a lot of tourists that are coming here on a bit of a shoestring budget and contributing very little, but using quite a lot of our facilities. Like freedom camping is a big issue at the moment, and things like that are getting harder and harder to manage as we're getting a bigger increase in population.
In terms of the hunting, there are some conflicts which arise around for want of a better expression, the management of the game that's here and the access of the hunting. Be that from the native population, from the people who live here, you guys, and the foreign hunters coming here. What is that dynamic like, and how has that changed?
Management's a loose term in New Zealand.
Yeah, that was why I was trying to think of some other way of phrasing it, but I couldn't.
management around the world seen as, game management or whatever is, you've got seasons, you've got restrictions, you've got limits, you've got this and that. You guys are a little bit different. In the UK, you don't necessarily have public land hunting as such. It's all pretty tied up in managed systems. Here's kind of the other end of the spectrum, like in our public land, our government still officially has most of our game animals, as we call them, on a pest status. And so they're still pretty low on the list in terms of looking after them properly, which is causing a lot of problems with the average New Zealand hunter. Although our government might decide that tahr and red deer are a pest, not many hunters have that view. There's not many people out there just thinking, I'm going to kill these deer because I don't want them here. They've tried to kill them for a long time. They are part of our ecosystem now. How many deer we should have, how many tahr we should have within the country is still up to debate. I think there needs to be a bit more research into what's an acceptable level. But the biggest problem we have on our public land is there's never been a long-term management system, and so our hunting on public land can go through massive sort of bust and boom cycles in terms of population numbers and trophy potential, and a lot of that is well beyond our control. Things like the price of venison, has a huge impact on how many deer there are going to be, and that can change. You open up a new market into China and all of a sudden all the deer are dead because they're all put in the freezer. So a lot of those things the average Joe Bloggs hunter has no control over, but it does have a huge impact on his hunting.
I mean, do you think that the sort of unrestricted foreign hunters being able to come in has had a detrimental impact to some of the species? I mean, you would think that might be playing a role.
Yeah, in some places.
And by that, maybe sort of a lack of respect, because they're seen as pest species anyway. So, in terms of how people tackle the hunting that they're actually doing,
yeah,
how they conduct themselves.
Yeah, New Zealand's kind of a test for people's ethical standards, I think, because you can more or less do what you want when you come here in terms of, we offer guided hunts, helicopter hunting, high fence hunting, any type of hunting you can dream about, you can do it here. And I think a lot of people forget about their ethical standards or forget about the way they treat game animals when they come to New Zealand. Would we treat our animals the same if we had bighorn sheep here? Even if they were introduced, I think they would be treated differently. I think a lot of people don't relate well to an animal like a tahr. It's seen as a goat, and it's just a goat, we'll just shoot them. And one of the biggest problems we have on public land is our game animals are so skewed in terms of population dynamics. Like our tahr are a really good example, where a lot of areas we have massive female populations with a really, really low age class and a really, really low male age class, which is purely overhunting by hunters. We don't need to have 500 nanny tahr in a valley with 10 bulls. You want to have a good age class and bulls with a low nanny number to reduce environmental impact.
That comes down to education, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And a sort of a change in the ethical standards of people who are utilising the resource, which is your game animals.
Yeah, trying to make the right decisions, I think. The animals like tahr and chamois to an extent as well are really good examples of animals that are mainly seen as trophies. Trophy hunting doesn't have a good sort of image, but let's be honest, like we were out there hunting for a week and we shot 2 animals. We took the usable meat we could off them, but the reality was we weren't going to go out there and shoot a whole heap of animals just to fill our freezer, because the effort required was pretty huge. It took us a whole extra day just to get the meat off that tahr.
But we were looking for, and this you could get into a whole debate about what is a trophy and define that. But we were looking for a particularly old, with respect to the Tahr, we were looking for a particularly old bull. We looked at a lot of Tahr.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And, I think if you're going to go to that huge effort, most people kind of want something a bit extra to it. It adds to the experience. We spend a lot more time there looking for different animals. And I think if a few more of us had that kind of attitude towards our species and tried to bring our age class a bit better and try to balance our populations out, we would see both a reduced environmental impact. In terms of the population, there might actually be less animals, but we've got a higher chance of finding a mature male because we've got more males than we do females, for example. Whereas in most places we go, the population is skewed so far the other way because people are out there just smacking all the males they see, going, oh, they're just a pest, we'll just shoot them all and measure them on the ground.
And you've seen the aftermath of that before while you've been out hunting.
Yeah, quite regularly. And like we've seen today in the Hut book.
Yeah.
People shooting, 20 bulls and more than that in one trip.
And gleefully writing about it.
Yeah, and what do they really achieve? Do they, I don't know, maybe they have a bit of fun, but if you want to shoot a whole heap of critters, you're far better off to try and shoot some females. Well,
that's where the population control comes from.
Yeah. And some of our animals need it and some don't. Like chamois, for example, are not in high densities anywhere in the country. They're not an animal that needs to be controlled, I don't think, in any way. Just the nature of the species, they don't breed up in high density areas, and they don't.
You don't see them in groups like we saw the Tahr.
No, and they're not destructive in their habits. They're a pretty low impact animal, and they spread out over a big area. So there's no need to go out there and just shoot them for the sake of it.
What is the situation with what you guys term heli hunting? I mean, it's not a phrase that most people will have even heard of back in the UK. I don't think it exists really anywhere else.
No,
as far as I know.
No, they do a bit in Texas at the moment.
Oh, okay, well, yeah. I think there's not much. I think everything happens in Texas, so to some extent, doesn't it?
I think New Zealand can claim the invention of heli hunting. So heli hunting's a bit of a vague, open term. Some people will call what we did heli hunting.
Yeah. Because
we used a helicopter to access the mountains, which I don't really call helicopter hunting. If you take a super cub into the mountains to hunt sheep, is that plane hunting? Not really. You drive a truck to the end of the road where you're truck hunting.
Yeah.
You've got
we still did a shit ton of walking when we got up there.
You've got to access the mountain somehow. So in terms of what people generally call heli hunting, we have a couple of different forms. We have like wild animal recovery. So these are guys out there shooting deer mainly for meat recovery. So they'll be flying around the helicopter pilot, and there's a shooter swinging out the door shooting deer, and those deer are flown out for meat. And then we have, at the moment, Department of Conservation does some population control on Tahr, for example, and that will be just search and destroy missions. So
mainly on females.
Yep, they're only shooting females. So they're flying around the helicopter in areas with high density and shooting females at the helicopter. That there could be termed heli hunting. And then we have what the industry determines is called AATH, Aerially Assisted Trophy Hunting. And this is heli hunting, which is clients or international hunters generally and guides using helicopters to assist them to find their animals. So these are generally spot and drop hunts. So you'll be flying around until you find your animal, get out the helicopter and shoot it, and away you go. But due to the nature of animals now, the amount they've been hunted with helicopters, they don't really take to spot and drop too well, because by the time you spot them, they've spotted you and they're on the move. So under current AATH concessions, we're allowed to use what's termed herding. So you don't see much of this happening on social media anymore because the videos are deleted quick smart for obvious reasons. But you can fly around in a helicopter, spot your tahr or your chamois, and you get out the door with your guide, and then the pilot gives them a little bit of encouragement to come back your way, and then you can shoot your tahr and away you go.
And there's a whole ethical spider web when you get into that.
Yeah, it starts to become a bit of a debacle, really. Things like wild animal recovery, like what we see in Texas, where you're shooting pigs out of the helicopter. You'd be hard pressed to call that hunting, really.
That's population control.
Yeah, it's like going out at night and shooting predators or varmints or whatever with a spotlight.
Or like rabbiting at home.
Yeah, it has its place. I suppose it's within the hunting umbrella, but you might determine it more shooting or pest control or game management, or you can think up different names for it, but it's not really what we'd use to promote hunting or call hunting. Aerially assisted trophy hunting has it written in the name that it's a trophy hunt. So these hunters are looking for trophies. They're looking for mature bull tahr or mature chamois bucks, and it's sold as a trophy hunt. And that is where you start to have problems, I think, when things are sold as a trophy hunt. It kind of doesn't sit well with the non-hunting public. When people see the word trophy hunt, there's a lot of things that go on in people's heads that gets confused with what's going on, I think.
But in terms of how a hunt like that operates, I mean, that must split just the hunting community, never mind the non-hunting community.
Yes. Yeah, there's not really anyone I know that supports AATH or is kind of aligned with it that's not filling their pockets with it. There's no recreational hunters in New Zealand that go, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Generally there's only a few groups of people that are involved with it, and that's the guides that are doing it and the helicopter pilots that are involved. I do know some helicopter pilots that are hard against it. They do it. It's their job. It's like the taxi man delivering the drug dealer. It's kind of like, do you blame the taxi man or do you blame the drug dealer? It's kind of like that. The helicopter pilots are just there. They fly the machine. You pay them money. They just,
somebody will do it.
Yeah, they're just flying machines. They don't really have a lot to do with it, I don't think. They're not marketing those hunts or selling those hunts to clients. That's the guide and outfitters that are doing that.
The big question is, if that is what you're purchasing, if you know fine well that is what you are buying into as a hunt, why the hell would you want to do it in the first place? I mean, that's my personal mindset. It's not something that I'd want to do. It doesn't make any sense to me as to why I'd want that as an experience. I can understand it, like you've explained. If you're doing it as some sort of management population control, then yeah, you're using the tools that are at your disposal to do something as efficiently as possible. But if you're doing it as a recreational hunting experience, I think you're losing a lot.
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons why people will look at that as a hunting option. Some of it is, it's thrill and exciting, and you can't do it anywhere else. It's not a thing that you can do anywhere else, so people see it as, it's like a bungee jump or whatever. It's something they're not normally going to do, but when in Rome, they'll give it a go. So there's that kind of group of people, I think, that end up doing that hunt. And then I think there's a group of people that are, I don't know whether you call it convinced or talked into it or sort of coerced in that direction for whatever reason. Like we've seen, tahr hunting and chamois hunting, real deal on foot, can be physically demanding. Like all mountain hunts, it's not for anyone. It's not for everyone. I mean, there's people get old, people are unfit. There's just people that can't do that type of hunt, and that's fair enough. Not everyone's going to be able to do it. But does that mean that you can use a helicopter to chase an animal around the mountain so you can shoot it for fun? I don't know. I think in New Zealand we're lucky in that we have other options. Like we have very good private hunting on private areas that are both free range and fenced. And private land hunting, you can take clients of any sort of ability onto good quality animals, both free range and fenced. There's a lot more options in New Zealand than we have in most other places in the world, because we have both the wilderness hunting. What we were doing is kind of one end of the extreme, and then you can go and stay in a 5-star lodge and hunt a private reserve, and it's a lot easier in terms of the physical side of the hunt, but you can still walk away with a good quality animal that you have still earned a lot more than hunting with a helicopter anyway.
There's a couple of other things I want to run through, but I think what we're going to do is probably do it tomorrow. It's cold and it's late. I want to touch on the sort of well-documented and publicized poisoning for predators, the 1080 drops, which most people will be familiar with. The phrase 1080 poisoning in New Zealand, and the government plan to remove predators by 2050. I want to talk through that a little bit, and possibly also touch on your experience of working in North America as well. I think that would be quite interesting. But I think we'll call that an evening for now, and pick it up tomorrow, because I'm hoping that the cloud will have lifted and I'll get to see a little bit more of this awesome valley that we're in.
Might get a walk around.
Hopefully.
No, sounds good.
I think it would be good to talk a little bit about the public lands and how that works in New Zealand, because for our North American listeners, they have access to public land, and it's very much at the forefront of a lot of discussions right now because of the issues that they're having in North America with access to public lands and potentially having some of those public lands taken back and privatised. In Scotland and the UK, we do have some public land. Like the Forestry Commission is essentially public land that you could access if you go and pay the fees for a block. And in terms of public access but non-hunting access in Scotland, we do actually have access to everything, even though it's not public land. You've got access over private land, which I was explaining to Tyler from Modern Huntsman when he was over a few weeks ago, and he was absolutely amazed by, because private land in North America is just that. It is private and you cannot access it. So explain the layout in New Zealand, because I was quite interested to understand that, and you were showing me some of the maps which were incredibly detailed about what land was where and how you could access it, both for recreational outdoor stuff and for hunting as a Kiwi.
Yeah, so we've got a few different sorts of public land. So we have our basic public land, stewardship land, which is managed by the Department of Conservation, and that there's pretty open access most of the areas. Some areas will have some restrictions on how you can access them, but generally you can get in there and wander around and do what you want within reason. And then we have National Park, like we're just inside the National Park here now, which has a few more restrictions on things like with hunting with dogs or bringing dogs into the national park, and fires and the way you can access them. And then we have wilderness areas as well, much like they have wilderness areas in North America.
So we were on the edge of a wilderness area when we were hunting last week.
Yep, we're on the edge of a wilderness area, and wilderness areas are set up to be just that, wilderness. They're not supposed to have any huts or tracks or any kind of modified landscape within them, and things like helicopter access, and the same within the national park. You're generally not allowed just to fly around in a helicopter and get out and do what you want. So they have restricted landing sites within the wilderness areas and within the national park, which is good. It's great to have areas that are set aside to be pure wilderness. There is a bit of grey area around helicopter access to some of these areas, like for example, like here we couldn't fly in here,
but we were allowed to drive in along the riverbed.
Yeah, we were allowed to drive, and we couldn't fly in and land within the national park and just get out and make a camp or whatever. But they are allowed to helicopter hunt in here. They have concessions to do that, which is, I think, kind of defeats the purpose a bit of the wilderness areas and of the national parks. It's a hard one, because
you better just elaborate on that a little bit, because it's we used a helicopter to get into where we were, which saved us probably a day walking through the bush. But there's a spectrum of use of helicopters and actual helicopter hunting. So most people won't understand what that is.
Yeah, it would have saved us about 2 days.
2 days.
2 days. Depends how fast you walk. So, like, within the wilderness area, like where we went into, we couldn't fly and land within the wilderness area and get out, make a camp and hunt there for a week. But we could have flown in there and done an AATH hunt. So we could fly in there, fly around, find our Tahr, get out the door, a helicopter chases him around for us, and then we shoot him and fly home. So that there's a bit of a...
Seems a little bit of a contradiction.
Yeah, a bit of a contradiction how that works. They are required to have concessions to do that, and there's only a certain number of operators that have concessions to do that, but it still does happen, and at times, especially this time of year and onwards, there is quite a lot of helicopter activity in certain parts of the wilderness areas and national parks, which, yeah, kind of defeats the purpose to them a little bit. I don't know how that's going to change over time. I think that AATH, the way it's currently run, has a limited lifespan. I don't think it's going to be a long-term option in terms of promoting that as a viable trophy hunting or recreational hunting or sporting hunting.
It's certainly,
method.
If you were to explain it, it wouldn't sit very well with the general public.
No.
Like if you were to explain that at home, helicopter hunting, like you've just described it, people would be like, what the fuck?
Yeah, more or less, and there's a reason why you don't see any videos of it online.
Yeah.
Like last year was a good example. There was some American guys over here, and they're not the only ones that go on AATH. There's plenty of people out there that are doing it. And they did their AATH hunt for a chamois, and that was filmed, and that hunt was put up online, and I don't think it lasted a week. I think it was...
I remember when it made it to Facebook.
Was 5 or 6 days before that was completely eradicated off all face of the earth due to the negative backlash they received. And I think the big difference between the negative backlash they receive on a video like that, or that style of hunting, compared to the normal type of anti-hunting backlash we see, is that it's not the anti-hunters or non-hunters that are having a go at these guys. It was the general hunting public. Guys that I read all the comments, and it's guys that, I've been a hunter all my life, and this is bullshit.
This isn't hunting.
You can't call yourself a hunter and all this kind of jazz. You can imagine what it was like. And if you're taking the general hunting public that understand hunting and they know what hunting's about, if they don't accept that as a viable form of hunting, does it have a place? How do we defend that against the anti-hunter when they decide to turn up? I think we're going to have a lot of problems. I mean,
there's one thing. It's a little bit like using... I was telling you about some discussions I'd had online about using thermal for hunting, for recreational hunting. It's a little bit like that. It's the use of technology for hunting. And you can understand why you'd want to use helicopters as part of your management process. We use helicopters in Scotland to count red deer every year as part of the census. And that makes perfect sense. And here... we can go on to talk about this a bit. There is, through your government bodies, there is the use of helicopters to control populations. But as a recreational activity, why would you want to stand on a mountainside and have a helicopter herd game towards you? It doesn't make any sense to me from a recreational hunting standpoint.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of debate. I think you can go on, and where do you draw the line? Like if you look at North America, for example, areas where there's the expanding pig population, we see helicopter hunting for pigs.
In Texas in particular, yeah.
And we've got the same thing in New Zealand for certain species, and the same in Australia, and quite a few places around the world they actually use helicopter hunting as a management tool or a pest control tool, however you want to call it. And I don't think there's a lot of debate over that. Animals like pigs can definitely cause a lot of problems.
Yeah.
But there's no one out there shooting these pigs and calling it trophy hunting. You know, I think the trophy hunting words are a dangerous sort of name. The way it's worded here in New Zealand, this is called AATH, is aerially assisted trophy hunting.
Mm-hmm. There also seems to be a little bit of, from some of the pictures that I've seen of people who have done that. There's also a little bit of almost, not always, sometimes there's a freaking helicopter sitting behind them, but there's also a little bit of a dishonesty with it, where it looks like there's been, you know, some sort of great wilderness hardship, which I think's awesome. But it hasn't been like that. It's been a couple of hours up, boom, bang, done.
Yeah.
30 minutes back down to the nice warm lodge.
It's the same with high fence hunting or game estate hunting or whatever. You know, no one goes out there and shoots their red stag or their big whitetail buck or whatever and goes on the front of a magazine and says, "Here's a high fence deer I shot."
Yeah,
you know, they never mention that. You know, they'll write a story about it or get it published or whatever, but they don't mention that it was in a high fence or it was a farm bred animal. And you don't see these guys mention that, we just chased it around with a helicopter. Yeah, they kind of leave out the finer details.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit of bent truth going on there, I think, with a few hunters. And I don't know, at the end of the day, it's, you know, who are they trying to fool? Were they trying to fool themselves? Or
I think probably themselves.
They're trying to fool everyone else. Yeah, I don't know.
But talk about the control and kind of management of the game that you have, and how it's viewed by the government and hunters here, because there's a bit of conflict there, and it's an interesting dynamic that you have, and it's maybe one that, well, hopefully is going to change as you push on into the future.
Yeah, we've kind of reached a bit of a tipping point here where the bulk of our hunting public in New Zealand is, I think the majority of people are trying to push for a better style of management, a long-term management goal where we have better established sort of systems in place. So things like helicopter control and wild animal recovery, shooting deer for meat, things like that, I think they all have their place within New Zealand, but I think there needs to be better guidelines about where, when, and what, and how these things happen. Because at the moment, on our public land, we can have massive boom and bust cycles. Like our red deer are a good example, where you can go in a valley and there's a whole heap of deer in there. It's great. You know, you can find a good stag, you can find a good hind to put in the freezer, and then the price of venison picks up, and a helicopter boy gets in there and kills them all.
Yeah.
And in some ways, the way it's managed now is not good for the commercial operators either, or for the recreational hunters, because there's no job security for the venison hunters. There's no long-term plan. There's no long-term management. It's not like you guys see in a lot of your managed estates. You know, there'll be a quota on what they're going to shoot every year.
Yeah, they'll have a plan,
and that's worked out, and it's based on actual science, and it actually works.
Yeah.
You know, they've been managing areas for hundreds of years, and they'll have, you know, roughly set out what their population's going to be and what type of offset they have to do every year to manage that population. Whereas in New Zealand,
we're shooting a lot of females to do that, to manage that population.
Yep. And it needs to happen in certain species in certain areas. You know, there needs to be that type of more commercialised shooting, I suppose. It's not really what you'd call hunting to a point. You know, it's a job that needs to be done, and it needs to be done in a professional manner. I think it's not just people out there just shooting animals for the fun of it. You know, it has a purpose.
Yeah, that's the hard thing of it. If you look at the estates back in Scotland, the actual population management of the deer herds, the vast majority of that is actually done by the deer stalkers themselves, not the recreational hunters, because they do it more. I mean, they do it day in, day out, so they're doing it way more efficiently. And yeah, they take people out to go and hunt hinds, and it's incredible value for money, because hinds cost a lot less than stags. And for me personally, I think you get a great experience hunting hinds in the winter, because the conditions are harder, the hinds are pretty alert, and you get the opportunity to go and hunt quite a number of animals, whereas you might only get a chance to shoot or be able to afford to shoot one stag. But you don't really have that kind of system here where you've got permanently employed people looking after an area where you would go in, you as the person looking after there, and go and take care of 150 females of a particular species in that area.
Not on public land. So private land's a different thing here. Some private land here is managed like that.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, some of it will be because it's managed or owned by an outfitter or a guiding company, and they have their own goals and what they want to do. But on public land, we don't have any sort of management system that has any goal in mind.
You have you were showing me the map the other day. I mean, there's a lot of public land.
Yeah, there is.
Especially down the west coast.
Yeah, so like you guys in Scotland, it's all sort of privately managed.
Yeah,
the hunting,
most of it.
And there's money behind it. In North America, on public land, we see things managed. There's different states and different areas that are managed for different reasons, but the way they can manage it is through their hunting techniques and seasons and tags. So some areas they're going to issue a certain number of doe tags or elk cow tags and have rifle seasons and archery seasons, and they can work out. You can go online and work out how many animals were shot out of a certain area. I've seen the statistics. You can go back 5 years, 10 years, what the success rate is, how many animals were shot out of this area.
They've got a lot of data.
Yeah, and it's all based on pretty sound science, and it does work. This is the main thing. It does work long term, and there's money involved with it, so it's a continually funding system. Whereas here we've kind of missed the bat with that, and culturally with our hunting culture in New Zealand, it's going to be rather hard to implement a management system. It takes a long time for people to change their opinions and to have the laws change with it as well. Some people here don't think we need to change anything. They think, just stay the way it is. It's the way it's meant to be. But I think as we have an increase in population and our wilderness areas become less wild, and over time as the population expands, you can't escape the number of hunters we have. There's just more and more people getting out there, and people are either going to lose out on hunting because it's going to be overhunted, or they're going to lose out on the quality of the experience.
In North America, they've got quite a good way of the people hunting paying into a system that pays for the management through the government organizations. That kind of link doesn't seem to exist so much here.
No.
But, I mean, it sounds like you would benefit if there was a link like that.
Yep.
But that requires legislative change, I suppose.
Yes. Yep. And it's kind of the chicken before the egg. Do we need to see our laws change before we see the hunting culture change in New Zealand, or does it need to happen the other way around? It's hard to say. At the moment, we really need something to happen upstairs. The big people in the beehive need to think hard about how many voters are there that this is involved with. There's a lot of hunters out there. I was
going to say, as a portion of your population, you probably have more hunters. I mean, you only got like 5 odd million people here. Yeah, as a portion of your population, you've got a lot of hunters.
Yeah, we've got about 4.5 million people, and most of New Zealand, especially the South Island, is still very rural based, and most people, even if they're not hunters, I have friends that have never been hunting at all, not hunters at all, but they still understand roughly what's going on, and have a bit of connection with, that makes sense. You go out and you find a deer and you shoot it and bring it home and eat it. That makes sense to people. They go, that's a legitimate thing to do. We don't have yet, anyway, in New Zealand. We don't have the kind of anti-hunting pressure that you guys are seeing in Europe and what North America is seeing at the moment. So we're quite lucky at the moment that we have the freedoms to do what we want publicly. It's not a problem to walk around town and you're hunting in fishing clothes covered in blood and guts, you
don't really. No one really turns their head, do they?
No. You drive around town with a pig on the back of your truck, and no one bats an eyelid.
You probably get a few thumbs up as you're driving.
Yeah, that's just a normal kind of thing. And I think that was the way it was in Europe and North America, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But things have changed mainly through the increase of the urban population. You've got big cities and people are removed from the outdoors and removed from how nature actually works. We're starting to see that in the North Island here. Auckland's a huge city now. There's more people live there than the whole South Island. And I think we will eventually see the problems that you guys in Europe are seeing and what North America is seeing. But it's just taken a bit longer to get here. But I think we're in a position where we can kind of predict the future to a point. We can see what has happened in Europe and what has happened in North America and go, well, right, we can be a bit ahead of the curve and make some changes here to sort of safeguard ourselves for what is to come.
But part of that is going to be to have some sort of management plan for your game where the game has a value.
Yep.
And people don't treat them, and I think this, we've talked about this a lot over the last week, where they're not seen as a pest.
Yeah.
Because that kind of mindset seems to be the root cause of a lot of the problems.
Yeah, and a lot of that has changed. People of my generation, not all of them, but a lot of us have kind of changed our opinions on what we were grown up with. Like my grandfather's generation, they were either shooting game to kill them or shooting game to make money out of them, either through skins or bounties on animals. And my father's generation kind of inherited that from them. But now we're seeing a lot of the newer generation. I think it's a number of things, but exposure to international exposure to what the rest of the world is doing, exposure to systems that are different to what we have, and people go, oh, hold on, there's another way to do this. This isn't the be all end all kind of system we have in New Zealand. There is better ways to go about it, but we are behind the times in terms of the way our government is managing things, and they're losing out on that as well, I think.
I don't want to go rewind the clock a wee bit, because at the start we said we were going to tell people about the hunt that we did, and we actually we got sidetracked. We spent a lot of time walking around, a lot of time sitting with the spotting scope, studying animals, and I learned a lot from you this week in terms of age classing and the importance of selecting the right types of males, especially with regard to Tahr, which we spent the most time looking at. Give me the sort of the short version rundown of what of the knowledge that you've gained about Tahr throughout your lifetime of hunting, and what people need to consider. I mean, one of the things that I always try and impress upon people, and I was guilty of not doing that for this trip because I just got too busy, is if you're going to go to, especially another country, and go and hunt a species you've never hunted before, try and take the time just to learn a little bit about it, because I think you gain so much more from it. And if you're with a really good guide, they will impart a lot of that knowledge on you when you're in the place. But it's nice to go with a little bit of knowledge to start with.
Yeah, hopefully we know what we're doing. I have my opinions on how I think things should be managed here. Some people probably think it should be different. But alpine game generally around the world, and here in New Zealand especially, we don't need a huge quantity of animals in the alpine environment. Alpine environments are quite sensitive, so I don't think we need to have 100,000 tahr stomping around in the hills. So in terms of our population management, I think we need to have a really high male to female ratio and a good age class to the animal. We get people from all over the world come and hunt tahr with us, and most people at the end of the day, they say they don't care about inches. They're not looking for a particular sized trophy or whatever you want to call it, a particular sized animal. But with the Tahr, something that makes a Tahr is the skin. You know, a big bull Tahr has a big mane, and
they're incredible to watch.
It's a pretty unique species. So one of the only animals that actually has what you call a mane.
It looks like a miniature muskox when you see it walking across the sky.
Yeah, they are very similar in the way they walk and the posture to them. And the Tahr is a slow growing animal. You know, like most mountain game, they take quite a few years to reach maturity. So for us as guides, we're looking for bulls that are kind of minimum 6-7 years old, hopefully a bit older than that, because they take that long to get fully grown, and they take that long to actually get their proper full skin, and that is what people are after. So our job as guides is to make sure you guys are safe, first and foremost, moving around the hills, and try to pick out those older bulls. It usually takes a bit more patience and a bit more sitting and looking, and you might have to walk a little bit further, but at the end of the day it usually pays off. The area we were hunting is pretty low density in terms of Tahr. We didn't see a huge number of animals, but we did see quite a good male to female ratio.
Yeah, we did.
Which was good. And some areas you see it's a lot different. Some areas, especially on the east coast, you see very high numbers of females and low numbers of males, and that is where we try to implement, you know, a bit of nanny shooting. You know, you find your mature bull and you shoot him, and you know there might be a few too many nannies running around, and there's nothing wrong with shooting a couple of them. You know, they're good to eat, and they do have nice skins as well. They're pretty plain looking compared to a bull, but they are nice and soft. So
make a good jacket.
Yeah. Yep. So I think it just takes people to think a little bit more about, you know, what is the long-term goal. You know, am I helping myself out? You know, you think, I'm going to come back 5 years down the track, or next month I'm out here hunting and I want to find a bull or whatever, but I've shot 18 or 20 young bulls like we've seen in the hut book here. Yeah. You know, guys come in, shoot 20, 30 young bulls.
And that was in a week. What you're referring to.
Yeah, you know, just have they helped anything? What have they achieved? You know, in terms of population management, and that's what people often fall back on. Oh, you know, I'm helping to manage the population. You know,
not if you're shooting males.
Yeah, for all species around the world, shooting males is, you know, it's more or less pointless in terms of population management. You're far better off spending that time and effort shooting females, which definitely does have its place. There's definitely areas where that needs to happen. But just going around and shooting a whole bunch of young males of any species, it doesn't matter what they are, it doesn't really achieve anything. I don't think anyway.
For me, when we were, you know, when we've been sitting watching Tahr on an opposite face, and you've been pointing stuff out to me, look how far the mane's coming down the body, trying to count the growth rings. I mean, that's something that kind of knowledge doesn't exist back home because we don't have anything that has growth rings. It's all antlered game. That was fascinating to me, to try and understand how that works in terms of aging an animal. I was kind of quite amazed, even though you got a telescope, you were 200 meters away, being able to age it. And the particular bull that I shot, I mean, you had only looked at that for about 5 seconds and you knew immediately that that's an old bull.
Yeah, I get lucky every now and then. I get it right every now and then. There
was a level of excitement in your face when he walked out.
It's one of those things that it just takes a long time to get a handle on.
And looking at a lot of bulls.
Yep.
Over time.
And you know, we're all human, we all make mistakes, and we don't get it right all the time, but we try our best. You know, it's the same. You'll have good guys in Scotland, and they'll have a pretty good handle on their stags, and they'll know exactly what's going on. And it just comes from spending hours out on the hill looking at animals. There's no sort of shortcut. You can read a book and learn a little bit, but at the end of the day, you've got to get out there and spend a lot of time looking through a scope at critters. Animals like Tahr and chamois, for example, as well. You know, the ratio for horn to body size is very small. Aging them on the hoof is very difficult. I haven't hunted a lot of other game, but they're pretty similar in terms of mountain goats, a similar sort of proportion in terms of horn to body size, and they're pretty hard to age. Sheep, for example, are generally a lot easier to age because their horns are, a lot bigger and a lot more defined in terms of finding their annuli.
Yeah. It was, for me, when we walked over to the Tahr that I shot and killed, and to see the age of a bull like that, and it wasn't in particularly good shape. You reckoned he was probably be his last winter, and there is a certain satisfaction. Forget about inches. There is a certain satisfaction knowing that you've taken a very old animal. That was probably his last year anyway.
Yeah, it's quite cool to be able to do that and see. I'm pretty sure a Tahr like that was at the end of his life. We see bulls live 14, 15 years old is about as old as they get. Your bull, like, we skinned him out and cut him up, and both of us, he's probably one of the worst conditioned animals we've seen. He was just skin and bones. It was
beyond ones that were actually sick.
Yeah,
I've never seen anything quite so thin.
Yeah, there was not an inch of fat on him, and he's still got another couple of months of winter to go, and he's not going to get a good feed until the spring. So reality is this was probably the end of his time anyway. So it's pretty cool to be able to get in there and find those animals. And there's a certain character, I think, to old mountain game. And worldwide, with sheep and goat hunters, age is something that a lot of people kind of strive for. I get clients from all over the world, and a lot of older guys that have hunted, they've hunted a lot of ibex and chamois and mountain goats and sheep, and the age of an animal is something that they always kind of put in high regard. Some people disagree. Some people don't think, it matters. It's you just get out there and get after it. But I think long term, in terms of management, it does make a difference. If you can try and select those oldest animals every time. It's obviously not possible all the time to take the oldest animal, but I think you've got to try a little bit.
That should be your goal.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Well, we last night when we came up, was it mince from the Tahr that we were eating last night?
Yeah, it was
chamois?
actually.
It was.
Yeah, it was.
Well, despite being 13 and a half years old, it actually tasted pretty damn good.
It's all right minced stuff. He would have been a bit chewy just to eat them as steaks, but the mincer solves a lot of those problems.
We had the chamois that I shot. We had the night before at your house, and that was bloody good.
Yeah, it was actually better than I expected.
A bit of backstrap cooked up. So yeah, we skinned them out, sorted the skulls out, extracted all the meat, put it in the packs, and walked it back to camp. Yeah, it was a pretty awesome experience, actually.
Yeah, it does add a lot of work to the hunt.
Extracting meat.
But it does add a whole different kind of experience to it. To us, it added a whole nother day to our trip, and
I think that's the responsibility that you need to take upon yourself if you're going to do that.
Yeah.
But for me, that's how I've always felt about it. Yeah, okay, maybe an ancient animal's not going to be the tastiest tenderloins in the world, but it still is. I think it still is something that we are responsible for if we pull the trigger, and and that's what we did.
Yeah,
you put all your shit in my bag, and then you put all the meat in your bag, and we walked it back out, and it wasn't exactly easy walking it out of that canyon. But
if you were going out there just to fill your freezer, you're probably not going to go Tahr hunting looking for an old bull. That's not the sensible way to fill your freezer. But just because an animal is a trophy, however you want to call it, does that mean that you can't eat it? You can actually do both, and that is what we see in North America, for example. Pretty much all the states, and in Canada as well, it's a legal requirement.
Yeah, you got to do it.
And we've
serious fines if you don't.
And we've kind of seen the backlash to what happens when that's not written in the law with the grizzly bears in British Columbia.
It doesn't sit well with the public.
Yeah,
and even a lot of hunters, it doesn't sit well. The idea of going and killing something, extracting whatever is the trophy for you, whether that be the skin or the skull or whatever, and leaving the meat to rot.
Yeah, it's a bit of a hard to justify for a lot of people, but then you do run into management things. You know, it doesn't seem so bad if you shoot a rabbit, and leave it on the hill. You know, if you kill a mouse,
you're going to eat it.
You're going to eat them. You know,
you're right. You're absolutely right.
Where do you draw the line? It starts becoming a bit of a grey area. You know, when an animal gets to a certain size, it seems like it's a waste.
Yeah, and we seem to treat it differently. I mean, there are plenty of people sitting in the towns and cities around the world with fly strips.
Yeah.
Sticking poor little flies to their fly strips, which just turn to crisp as it gets hot, and no one worries about that at all.
No, people think nothing of.
That's at the extreme end of comparing a fly to a tar, but it's the same idea, kind of.
Yeah. You think nothing of killing rats and mice, or you might have a magpie or a crow or something. You think nothing of shooting him. But
magpies don't taste so good.
You don't go out there and cut up your crow and decide you're going to eat it. Or certain animals that are determined to be a pest or a nuisance animal. Yet when it comes to shooting a deer, it just seems like a horrid waste to just leave it there on the hill.
It's funny how society has kind of categorized it like that.
Mm.
We care about certain animals more than others, or we feel an attachment, an emotion to certain animals more than others. I always think that my brother and I have talked about this before on the podcast, is that it always amazes us just how little people seem to be concerned about fish.
Yeah.
Whereas in terms of our impact and what we're doing to the planet, and when you look at our seas, I mean, what's happening underneath the water is atrocious. And we really need to care about our fish a lot more, even though they're cold, wet, and slimy.
Fish can't scream.
No, they can't.
So there's a huge ongoing ethical debate, on what is ethical, what is unethical, what's inhumane. There's so many loopholes and grey areas that you can discuss that it's kind of an endless debate. What goes on with commercial fishing. If that was happening with our commercial hunting, there'd be a lot more questions asked.
Because people would see it.
Yeah.
It's kind of out of sight, out of mind when it's out at sea.
Yeah, and you can relate to a furry critter, and especially when you get into African game and bigger game, when you start looking at animals like giraffes or an animal like a horse, for example. I had some hunters just recently from Kazakhstan, and in a lot of Central Asian countries, horses, used for riding. They're a huge part of their culture, but they're also used for meat.
Yeah, I've eaten quite a lot of horse.
And, that's a perfectly normal thing for them. They're farming horses purely for meat consumption, whereas a lot in the Western world, people get up in arms about that, and...
You wouldn't see horse in the supermarket. Well, I joke, and we've talked about this in the podcast before. You might not be aware, but our supermarkets, there was a big scandal maybe 3-4 years ago because a lot of the race horses that were being put down in Ireland were ending up in our beef burgers in the supermarkets in Scotland.
There's a bit more horse meat out there than what you think.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, you don't see it at home. You don't see it. You wouldn't see horse steaks.
No.
Because it's not palatable to people.
It's the same here. You think nothing to go to McDonald's and you have your Big Mac or your chicken burger or whatever. But if they had the horse Big Mac on the menu, people would be crying about it. And
maybe not in Kazakhstan.
What's the difference between a horse and a cow?
I think the French eat horse quite a lot. Yeah, quite readily. But then they eat frogs too. And
some of the Eastern European countries as well. I think they eat quite a lot of horse meat, but. Yeah, there's things like that, whereas who's right and who's wrong, there's a lot of cultural differences that have big impacts on the way animals are treated across the world.
You spent a bit of time in North America in the last few years. What was that experience like for you, and how important has it been in kind of shaping your understanding of the direction that you want to take personally? As a guide? Because I always think that we learn a lot from we can learn a lot from other cultures, other ways of hunting, and people don't spend enough time actually putting time aside to understand how people do things in different parts of the world. I've been fortunate that I've travelled a lot. I'm in New Zealand right now, so I'm learning how you've done, how you guys do stuff. I've spent some time in Africa and been to Nepal recently, and you get this amazing mix, and you realise that it can't be done the same everywhere, but there are probably things that one country or culture can learn from another.
Yeah, especially at a younger age, as you come out of school and if you're exposed, I started guiding at a young age, and then I did a couple of seasons in North America. If you do those things at a young age before you've really kind of set in your ways, I think it makes you question the way you do things because you're exposed to different systems. Like in Canada where I worked, it's a very different system to here, and there's a lot of Kiwis over there. Probably more Kiwis than Canadians at the moment working in the guiding industry. Both the outfits I worked at, we outnumbered the Canadians, probably like 5 to 1.
That's crazy.
There's a lot of Kiwis working over there at the moment.
What do you think the reason for that is? I mean, more Kiwis in other parts of the world.
I think there's a lot of Kiwis that love hunting. Right to the core of the person. They want to be out there hunting, and they want to try and make a living of it, and they enjoy the wilderness hunting, the challenge, the physical and mental challenge of wilderness hunting. And in New Zealand, the way our guiding outfitting industry is run, there isn't really the position for them. The bulk of the guiding industry here is focused around the high fence and the high-end lodge type of guiding. And I've talked to quite a few young Kiwis that have, and like myself, have worked a little bit in that industry, done a season or done a few of those hunts, and then go, well, this isn't really what I'm into. This isn't what hunting is to me.
Because there's not that many people here as guides doing what you do.
No, and the main reason behind that is because it's pretty difficult to make a living out of it. The bulk of the industry here is focused on the high fence, high end market. Mainly because that is where you can make big money. That is the way the industry is sitting at the moment, but that could well change. I think that industry is always going to exist in New Zealand, but I think there is a place for more of the wilderness hunting, and I think there's a big misconception in the South Pacific where free range of wilderness hunting is seen as a cheap option. Whereas in North America and Africa, for example, as well, the big high-end hunts, the expensive stuff,
is the wilderness stuff.
Is the wilderness hunt.
Because it's hard, the logistics are complex.
Yeah, your costs,
it's a lot of work.
Your costs are just a lot higher. You're looking at high-fence hunts, they're generally only a couple of days, or you can boil them down to hours, whereas wilderness hunts are quite often 10 days or 2 weeks, or like when I looked at Rex Forrester's book the other day briefly, he said his minimum trip was 30 days.
Oh, we were looking at that book. Yeah. That was back from the 1950s, wasn't it?
Yeah, 50s through to maybe the 70s, I think he kept going to.
Those boys were hardcore.
And the same in North America. You get up to the Yukon and Northwest Territories, and that.
Yeah, it's like 30 days.
20-day hunts. Yeah. And that is where the big money is. Obviously there's big costs involved with hunts like that. You've got huge logistic costs and running cost of horses and guides and wranglers, and all that adds up. But I think there's a bigger demand for that wilderness hunting as the bulk of the population around the world is becoming more urbanised.
I agree. I mean, we're even seeing it at home. More and more people want to have an experience, and an all-encompassing experience that goes far beyond pulling the trigger and killing something. Like what we've just done.
Yeah. People need a little bit of, getting out there, getting cold and wet, and having an actual story. When they come home from their hunt, and their friends or family or whatever ask them, how did your hunt go? It shouldn't be a 5-minute conversation.
It shouldn't be. I took 10 steps out the truck, put my sticks up, and pulled the trigger.
Yeah, there's there should be a proper story to it, a journey to it. You've got to sit down for a whole evening and explain what happened. It adds a lot more to the experience, and as people, you learn a lot and grow a lot, I think.
Yeah, you definitely do. You learn a lot about yourself.
Most people I get, at the end of the hunt, they're very different. And, you meet a person as a guide, we pick people up from the airport. A complete stranger we might have talked on the phone or email a little bit, and you spend 10 days in the bush with them, and you either love them or hate them by the end of it, kind of thing, most people you get along with, and you end up being quite good friends with people, when you're stuck in the bushes, you can't zone out, you've got to communicate with people, you've got to get along, you can't afford to have an argument, or you can't afford to get pissed off, because you need each other to survive and get through the trip. And that there's something that a lot of society is missing out on. You live in the city and you zone out to your neighbours, you don't want to talk to them, you hop on the subway. Like a few years ago, we went over to Paris and hop on the little subway, and you're jammed in there like sardines. You're sitting right next to someone, and
you're probably reading a book or looking at the phone.
And you say, "G'day, how's it going?" You try and have a chat with them, and they look at you like you're a rapist or something.
You Kiwis are just too friendly. That's the problem.
And they won't even say hello to them. And you're sitting within an inch of them, and they won't even talk to you. And that's, what? What does that say for the human race?
It is one of the cool things about, and we notice it when we do our wilderness hunts in Scotland. There's no signal. So you've got no internet, no access to anything on your phone, any electronic device. So you've got two choices. You either sit and read a book, which would be very antisocial, or you sit around the fire and tell stories, which is what we used to do before all of this, and that is what you do. And it's amazing how people kind of come out of their shells, and you start to learn about people at a sort of depth and level that you don't really get in normal society these days when you're out hunting and there's nothing but a wet ass and a hot fire.
People become human again.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, and quite often it takes a bit of hardship and a bit of wilderness before that happens. It's easy to kind of escape communicating with people and escape your feelings and escape all of that in modern society. It's easy to zone out and get stuck on your phone or stuck on the computer, and you don't have to talk to anyone. You can go a whole day and you don't have to talk to another person, which isn't healthy. We see a lot of problems with that in modern Western countries. We see a lot of mental health problems, and we're seeing a lot of issues that on paper shouldn't really be happening. We should all be happy. We've got 3 meals a day, we've got a house to live in. Why is everyone so upset? Whereas you go to countries like Nepal, for example, where people, in a lot of ways, you can look at it and say they're living in absolute misery. It's cold and it's hard mountains.
If you look at it with Western eyes. Yeah.
And they're struggling to survive. But on the other hand, they're the nicest people you're ever going to meet, and they're happy and they're absolutely loving life.
Yeah.
Yet it's easy to look at them on paper and think these people are having a horrible time. They've got nothing to eat, and it's cold and it's wet, and they're struggling to live. Yet they're thriving. So I think we've missed a lot of that with Western society.
You can enjoy life probably more with a lot less.
Yeah.
And I think that we get caught up in a lot of that. I think in our lives. It's just the way that our kind of our sort of Western culture's gone. We feel like we need more to be happier. When really, when you boil it down, and this is why I've made a lot of the choices that I've made in my life over the last 10 years, the things that you end up talking about and telling stories about, which tend to be the things that have brought you the most joy and have been most life-changing, because that's why you want to tell stories about them, are the things that tend to be stripped back. Yeah, you never go home. I'm going to be talking about this trip, for the next, probably until I die, to a greater or lesser extent. You never go home and tell your friends, I sat down in the office and I made $100,000 that day, No one cares. You should have seen that spreadsheet, man. Yeah, no one cares. You're not going to you sit around and tell your grandkids about the day you made all this money on the stock exchange or something.
that doesn't exist. No one cares.
It's also a very short story.
Yeah, no one cares about that. You know.
People, I actually find that increasingly, and I've noticed it more and more in the last couple of years, that people are intrigued and almost to a certain extent jealous of experiences. When you say that you've been somewhere or you're going to this place, or I mean, a lot of the stuff that we do is work, but I'm still getting a chance to travel and meet a lot of people. And people are envious of that, but they're envious of the experience.
Yeah.
And I think that is missing in a lot of people's lives.
Yep, just even, you know, things like being hungry or being cold or being wet. A lot of people in Western society have not actually experienced that in their whole life.
Which
is hard to imagine.
It's a great point.
You know, people think, you know, I'm hungry. It's like, you don't know what hungry is, you know. No. We don't know what being cold and hungry is, you know, because we just live in a soft cushion environment, and it's easy to get upset about meaningless things.
I think our feet did a pretty good job of knowing what cold was this last week.
Yeah, but
yeah, there's a whole spectrum.
We didn't lose any toes, and we survived. And at the end of the day, you laugh about it and go, "Oh, that was good fun."
Yeah,
where do I sign up to do it again?
Yeah, absolutely. Some people might think that doing something like the wilderness hunts here is just a case of you, a guide, looking after the logistics of picking someone out, and you get out into the middle of nowhere and you just see what happens because it's a wilderness area. But I mean, you were telling me about, you know, scouting in these places in the off season. There's a lot of work that goes into making sure that you know what you're doing, and you've got a handle on what's happening outside of the period of the time when you're here with clients. A lot of people won't appreciate that.
Yeah, our public land here is chopping and changing very quickly in terms of hunting pressure and game densities in different areas can change very rapidly. You know, especially with commercial operators or a certain group of hunters like we've seen in the Hut Book here. You know, you can have a certain valley and go in there, oh, this is a great spot. One group of guys come in there and kill 20 bull tahr.
Yeah.
And
that's a reality.
And that actually happens. And it really does change the hunting quality in areas very quickly. So both myself and Tim, you know, we spend hundreds of thousands of hours out there wandering around in the bush, getting a good handle on what's actually happening, and we try to pick locations that are going to work, that we know that we can find animals, we know they're going to be there one way or another, and areas we can move around in safely and look after people in the hills, because
it is dangerous terrain.
You can end up in a disaster if you're not prepared. Our mountains they're not the highest mountains in the world, but they can be very changeable in terms of weather and very dangerous. And we are seeing the other side of that. Unfortunately, we're seeing an increase in hunter deaths in the mountains. Some of that is inexperience. Some of it's just there's more people out there, so there's obviously going to be more accidents. But a lot of them are preventable. And you just have to kind of take things slowly and be prepared, and that is our job. You know, we spend a lot of time thinking about what we're going to do. We don't just run off into the hills randomly and make it up when we get there.
But do you think there's a lot of people going up into your hills here that are basically just not really prepared for the environment? Is that the reason why people have been dying?
Yes and no. Yeah, I think there is. I think in this modern day and age, we see it with everything. All the gear, no idea. It's easy to buy all the fancy stuff and get out there after it. And alpine hunting is very different to anything else. You know, you can be a very experienced hunter. You could have hunted, 50 species of animals across the world, but how much time have you actually spent in the mountains, actually in the alpine environment? What you learn hunting roebuck doesn't translate to getting around the hills. No, it doesn't. No. And a lot of people don't understand that, and it's hard to get that across and hard to prepare if you don't have an alpine environment in your backyard. Even the difference between the North Island and the South Island. There might be a few North Islanders listening saying, "Oh, we've got big mountains," and yes, there is some serious terrain in the North Island, but there's a big difference between that and hunting in a purely alpine environment. You know,
there's a certain way to move as well to be comfortable, and to be comfortable moving in those environments. I mean, it's some of what we did. It was out within my comfort zone, just because I don't get to experience it as often as you do.
Yep.
Because you're doing it all the time. And
it's one of those things that takes, what I'm doing now, what I was doing 5 years ago has changed. And I think we're always changing our kind of boundaries where we decide that, this is safe, or we've walked too far today, or how far can we walk, what type of terrain we're in. And those things are constantly changing. We always change our opinions, and the conditions themselves are always changing. So it's one of those things that takes a lot of time to gain experience. You've got to spend a lot of hours in the hills figuring out what's going on, and trying to get a little bit of training as well, talking to experienced guys on what they're doing.
I want to finish up on when we drove in here today to do this, the last bit of photography and filming and stuff we're going to do. We came past what was the stereotypical Kiwi hunter that I have in my mind. Those guys are hardcore. This guy was walking. I mean, it's freaking cold up here, and he had a pair of shorts on. I mean, explain of a certain generation, and those guys they seem a lot tougher than us in their puffy jackets.
He's a real Kiwi.
Yeah.
I'm pretty soft in the scheme of things. And I know I am. I feel the cold, and I don't wear my shorts. But the average Kiwi hunter is a different breed.
They seem to be.
Maybe not the smartest critter out there, but one that's reasonably tough. And like when I grew up hunting, and things like wet boots and having a wet sleeping bag and things like that are relatively normal.
Like that was just accepted.
It's not something you wake up in the morning and go, "Oh, my boots are wet." You wake up in the morning and go, that's just what they were always wet. So you just put them on and away you go. And the short shorts, like the guy we saw, he was in his 60s, I would say.
Yeah.
Possibly older. And there's snow on the ground. It's wintertime out there, snow and ice on the ground, and
we're right beside a glacier. It's just over here.
He's wearing short shorts, and that was it. He had a fleecy shirt on, and away you go, and he's wandering around out in the hills, and
quite happy.
He's probably been doing that for 40 years. And he'd look at us with your Gore-Tex pants and their bloody fancy jacket, and think, what is all this other crap?
So remember that next time you're worrying about all the latest gear.
Yeah. So I think it's easy to forget that humans are a bit tougher than we make out, and you would have seen the same thing in Nepal.
Yeah. I mean, some of those guys were walking up the mountains up at 14,500 feet with flip-flops on. Yeah. I think we're a lot tougher than we make out, and the average white man's become pretty soft. I know I have. Seem to get softer every year. Want more gear, warmer pants, and warmer clothes, and warmer socks. But it's quite good still to get back to the basics every now and then. I try and do a bit of a trip where you strip back your gear and just do it hard for a few days and kind of see what you're made of. And just sometimes it almost feels like we've taken some elements too far, and actually the way that some of the guys used to do it was probably better. There's some things you think, well, maybe actually that's better than the modern stuff that we're using now.
Yeah, things like the other night when we light a fire and cook your food on a fire as opposed to having your gas cooker. It might seem like, it's a bit of a pain to light the fire and it takes longer to boil your water, but there's a whole skill set and experience attached to the fire. You've got to know how to light a fire. You've got to find the wood. And it adds a whole lot more to the trip and to that small experience. Boiling a cup of tea has become, what is the new jet boil is 100 seconds or something. Yeah. They're advertising it, and that's great. But what's the rush?
Yeah, there's nothing else to do once the light goes down.
Have you ever sat down at night and go, "Holy shit, I've got 100 seconds to make my dinner"? But what are you going to do? 100 seconds. What do you do for the rest of the evening?
Yeah.
There's a point where you're there to enjoy the outdoors, and that's part of it. I don't think I've ever been in a rush to make a cup of tea in 100 seconds. It seems a bit ridiculous.
Yeah. You can see how that stuff's developed. But yeah, you're right. If you're here to enjoy the experience, enjoy all of it.
Yeah.
And enjoy the small things. And there is, we've always say this, but there is something, not that we could do it here where we are now, because one, it's bloody wet, two, there's no trees, and you're also not allowed to light fires here. But when you have the opportunity to just step it back a little bit like that, do it.
Yeah.
If you got the time to do it. And, because you do get a lot out of it. And fire is a funny thing. It connects us in an incredibly primitive way. It's addictive. The amount of time, I'm sure you're exactly the same, the amount of time you've probably spent just looking at flames is ridiculous.
It's very much the core of somewhere deep down inside a human. There's something about it. You can sit there and just look at a fire and it feels good for some reason.
Go try and explain that.
100,000 years ago when the first guy started it up, he was just like, holy shit, we've conquered the earth, this is it.
And I defy anybody, even somebody who's spent their entire life living in the city, has maybe never even got mud in their shoes, to sit round a fire and not be fascinated and entertained. I guarantee you every single person would be.
Yeah, you don't have to do anything, you just sit there and do nothing, more or less.
Occasionally prod it with a stick.
Stir it up a bit.
Yeah. Joesph, it's been awesome. It's not even over yet for me. I've still got a few days left.
Yeah, we've still got a few days.
But so far, to this point, it has been awesome. It's added to my life experience in a way that I probably didn't anticipate. And yeah, I've had a thoroughly good time. And if people want to check out your hunting outfit, it's just, is it hardyardshunting.com?
.co.nz.
So co.nz. There you go.
Yep.
We'll stick the link in the description to this podcast, and we'll probably have some posts up on the website as well.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here, and your cameras weren't too heavy after all. We managed to move around.
We managed it. No, it's been great, and there will be. There's going to be a whole ton of photos that we'll stick up online from this trip. I haven't, at the point of recording this podcast, I haven't put that much up on social media. A few things on the Instagram story, but expect by the time this goes out, that will probably all be out, and you'll see pictures. And there is a film going to come out as well, so you'll get to hear more from Joesph and see some of the awesome scenery and experience that we had while we've been hunting the last week.
You've done a better job of me taking photos anyway on my phone.
I don't know. I think you might have got a photo of the trip of the one with the reflection of my lens.
No, it's not bad.
Yeah, it was a good photo.
Little Samsung's not too bad.
Well, we better wrap things up. I'm just actually going to look out the window here. It's still freaking foggy.
It's not real good.
Oh, man. Oh, actually, look. I can see mountaintops there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it might be breaking up. It's supposed to be clearing up today, but
it would be good to see a few tops. We've got a bit of filming to do today before we wrap up and then drive out of here.
Film the inside of a cloud.
Yeah. We're going to tidy up a bit, repack our bags, and that'll be it. So from New Zealand for now, over and out. And that is it for another 2 weeks. Next time, you are going to hear from Simon Whitehead, the main ferreting man of the UK. He has just launched a new book with Scott Ree, who was a previous podcast guest, called Ahead of the Game. You're going to hear about that book and also his kind of backstory, life story.
It's a very good show, and we've been wanting to bring some more stuff from the UK for a while, and I think this is a good way to kick off getting more people from the UK and finding out about Simon's dying trade, I guess. It's amazing. It's fascinating. Whenever I see him at the shows, I'm always looking at the ferrets, and he had them here when we were recording the podcast. They're amazing creatures.
He's been up in Scotland doing demos at the Highland Show, which I saw him at last weekend, and then he's kind of been actually staying in our neck of the woods in the few days between that show and Scone Palace this weekend. So here's a chance to get a little bit ahead of the game. Go and check out Simon Whitehead, Pakefield Ferrets. He's very, very active on Twitter, so you can go and give him a follow on Twitter and check out his book, Ahead of the Game.
Definitely go and look at the book, because in fact, this is giving you a heads up before the show's out in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah.
They're already sold
over
half of their thing, and they don't know the next time they'll do another run. So if you want to get your hands on the book,
do it sooner rather than later.
Then you need to do it sooner rather than later.
So that is what's coming up. I don't think we've got anything else to say apart from going into the competitions that we mentioned at the start, which was to win a Hornady full-length reloading die. Check out the social medias, or just simply ping us an email.
I've just remembered something that's quite important.
That you should have mentioned at the start.
We are currently giving away 2 signed copies of Modern Huntsman.
Oh, that's been running on Instagram, isn't it?
This is why you have to listen to the end of the show. So all the people that may have turned off before the end of the show, you're now at an advantage here. It's going to be running for, I think, just over 2 weeks, looking at the calendar now, because the podcast is going out straight away. And it is only on Instagram. Sorry if you're not an Instagram user, but just get on Instagram. You don't even need to post anything on Instagram.
And if you don't use it, get somebody to get a friend to use it.
There is a post up, and it's a picture of Byron and Floki, the Cocker Spaniel, not a person, reading Modern Huntsman, and it's on the... just look for it. You'll find it.
It's near the top.
It's near the top. We'll keep putting up Instagram stories directing you to it. And all you have to do is to tag a friend in it who you want to share your winnings with.
And you and the friend
will win the signed copy. And it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can enter this.
It's going to be completely random, and it's going to be sent out straight from the guys at Modern Huntsman from the States. So we're not even having anything to do with the sending out.
Yeah.
We're going to give the names straight to them, and they will get them signed and any messages that you want in there and get them out to you.
So, yeah, that's super cool. I mean, I wish I could enter the competition, because I don't even have a copy of Modern Huntsman.
No, neither of us do. But Tyler is going to be back. He tells me in the fall this year.
But Byron had a copy of Modern Huntsman in his house, and then we were selling out so fast, and we had so many orders we had to send out, that he had to take his copy back from the house that was pristine and sell it. So we were actually giving away our copies now to everyone. Just supply and demand, isn't it?
So that's it, I think.
Yep.
We're done.
I think we are done. Definitely subscribe to this show. If you're on iTunes,
it's important.
Hit that subscribe
button.
Helps us a lot. Helps us a lot.
And give us a review.
Yeah, give us a review. And also, it means that when a show comes out, it comes up straight away. Just download it, done, dusted, and you get us in your ears for a few hours of your journey. Thank you very much.